They called him the Winter Duke, not for the season of his birth, but for the frost that lived in his chest where other men kept hearts. Duke Adrian Blackthorne stood alone in the gilded ballroom, surrounded by 300 nobles who would rather die than meet his eyes directly. Power has a peculiar taste, he'd learned. It tastes like fear dressed up as respect, like smiles that never reach the eyes, like the silence that falls when you enter a room. But tonight, something would crack through that ice, something he never expected. Stay with me through the shadows of this ballroom, because what begins here will shake a kingdom to its foundations, and the woman who'll do it doesn't even know his name yet. The crystal chandeliers of Thornhill Palace blazed like captured stars, each one dripping with enough wealth to feed a village for a year. Adrian moved through the winter banquet hall with the practiced ease of a predator who no longer needed to prove his dominance. The crowd parted before him without conscious thought, a human tide responding to an invisible current of dread. He'd stopped noticing it years ago, the way conversations died mid-sentence when he approached, the way women's laughter turned brittle and false, the way even the king's own advisors found sudden fascination with their wine glasses when his gaze swept past. This was the tax of power. You could have anything you wanted except genuine human connection. Adrian told himself he didn't miss it. A hand touched his elbow. Lord Ashford, drunk already, though the night was young, swayed into his path with the confidence of old nobility and older wine. "You're blocking the view, Ashford." The older man's face flushed crimson. "My apologies, Your Grace. I merely wish to introduce my daughter." Adrian's gaze cut past him to where Lady Ashford stood in a gown that cost more than his daughter's dowry, her smile bright and desperate. Behind them, the daughter herself, barely 18, eyes wide with that mixture of terror and ambition that Adrian had learned to recognize at 20 paces. "Your daughter is very beautiful," Adrian said, his voice carrying the warmth of a midwinter frost. "I'm sure she'll make some lord very happy, someone else." He moved past them before Ashford could sputter a response. Behind him, he heard the lady's sharp intake of breath, the humiliation landing like a physical blow. He should feel something about that, probably. Guilt, remorse. Instead, there was only the familiar emptiness, vast and cold as a frozen lake. The ballroom stretched before him in a blur of silk and scheming. 6 years he'd been Duke of Blackthorne. 6 years since his father's death had handed him a title, a fortune, and a reputation built on ruthlessness that even the old Duke would have envied. 6 years of playing this game where everyone wanted something from him and no one wanted him. "Your Grace," a smooth voice interrupted his thoughts. Duke Ravencroft approached with a politician's smile. "We missed you at the Finance Committee meeting last week." "I was occupied." "Of course." Ravencroft's eyes were shrewd, calculating. Though one wonders what could be more important than matters of state. "Unless the rumors about your acquisition of the Westmarch properties are true," Adrian smiled, showing teeth. "You should know better than to trust rumors, Ravencroft." But the older Duke leaned closer, voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Between us, Blackthorne, the king's worried about your influence. You've acquired more land in 2 years than most families hold in generations. People are starting to ask questions about your ambitions." "Let them ask." Adrian's voice could have etched glass. "I've broken no laws." "Not yet." Ravencroft's smile never wavered. "But the line between ambitious and treasonous gets thinner every day, doesn't it?" Adrian watched the Duke walk away, his jaw tight. This was the game. Whispers and warnings, alliances built on sand, threats wrapped in silk. He was good at it. Better than good. He'd turned his father's modest holdings into an empire that made the crown itself nervous. And he was so goddamn tired of it. A commotion near the servants' entrance caught his attention. Most of the nobility wouldn't have noticed. Servants were furniture to them, invisible until needed. But Adrian had learned long ago that the most interesting things happened in the margins. That's where people revealed who they really were, when they thought no one important was watching. He moved along the ballroom's edge, keeping to the shadows of the massive stone columns. Near a small service door, half hidden by heavy velvet curtains, he saw them. Lord Pemberton, red-faced and furious, had a young servant boy by the collar. The child couldn't have been more than 12, thin as winter kindling, eyes wide with terror. "You spilled wine on my wife's dress, you little rat." Pemberton's hand drew back, and the crowd nearby turned away with practiced indifference. This happened at every ball. Servants who made mistakes paid for them in bruises and fear. But before Pemberton's hand could fall, someone stepped between them. She was small, dressed in the plain gray dress of palace staff, dark hair pulled back in a simple braid. Nothing about her should have drawn attention. But there was something in the way she stood, shoulders squared, chin lifted, that made Adrian stop cold. "My lord," the young woman said, her voice steady despite the trembling Adrian could see in her hands. "It was my fault. I handed him an overfilled glass. If punishment is required, it should fall on me." Pemberton's face twisted with rage. "You dare interrupt me? I dare ask for justice." The maid's eyes were an unusual shade of gray, like storm clouds before rain. "The boy is new to service. I should have supervised him more carefully. Your wife's dress can be cleaned. There's no need for violence." The absolute audacity of it left Adrian momentarily speechless. Servants didn't talk back to nobility. They apologized, they groveled, they took their punishment and disappeared. This woman was committing social suicide, and she seemed fully aware of it. Pemberton's hand shifted to grab her instead. "I'll teach you to question your betters, girl." And Adrian found himself moving forward before he'd made the conscious decision to intervene. "Release her." 3 words delivered in a tone that could freeze blood. The entire corner of the ballroom went silent. Pemberton's hand froze in midair, his face draining of color as he turned to see who had spoken. "Your Grace." Pemberton dropped the maid's arm like it had burned him. "I didn't see you there. Clearly." Adrian stepped into the dim light and felt rather than saw the ripple of recognition move through nearby guests. A duchess gasped. Someone dropped a glass. The Duke of Blackthorn had just intervened on behalf of a servant. The scandal would be all over the palace by morning. "The matter is settled," Adrian continued, his gaze locked on Pemberton with the intensity of a hunting hawk. "You will return to the ball. Now." "Of course. My apologies. Now." Pemberton fled, the young servant boy scurrying after him. The nearby nobles found urgent reasons to be elsewhere, melting back into the crowd with whispered conversations. In seconds, the corner was deserted except for Adrian and the maid. She was staring at him, those strange gray eyes filled with something he couldn't quite identify. Not gratitude, not fear, something else. "Thank you," she said finally. "That was kind." "It wasn't kind." Adrian's voice came out harsher than he'd intended. "Kindness implies I care. I simply don't tolerate bullies in my presence." "Then why help us?" "Because Pemberton is a spineless coward who beats children because he can't control his own household." Adrian studied her face, searching for the usual reactions: fear, awe, the calculated interest of someone sensing opportunity. Instead, he saw only steady assessment, as if she were trying to solve a puzzle. "What's your name?" She hesitated, and he saw the calculation in her eyes. Smart girl. She knew that giving her name to the Duke of Blackthorn could be dangerous, but lying would be worse. "Clara Whitmore, my lord." "My lord?" Adrian raised an eyebrow. "I'm a duke. If you're going to address me, at least get the title right." Something flickered across her face. Annoyance, maybe, or defiance. "I'll remember that, Your Grace." She dropped a curtsy that was technically correct, but somehow felt mocking. "If there's nothing else, I should return to my duties." She turned to leave, and Adrian felt an unfamiliar emotion stir in his chest. Surprise. When was the last time someone had been eager to get away from him? Usually they clung like brambles, angling for favors or influence, or just the chance to say they'd spoken with the infamous Duke of Blackthorn. "Wait." Clara turned back, one eyebrow raised in question. The gesture was so unconsciously arrogant that Adrian almost smiled. "Why did you do that? Intervene for the boy?" "Because it was right." She said it simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Because someone had to. Because standing by and watching cruelty makes you complicit in it." Adrian felt something cold crack in his chest, a fissure in the ice that had kept him numb for so long. "Careful, Miss Whitmore. That kind of thinking is dangerous in a place like this. More dangerous than being the man everyone fears?" She met his gaze directly, and there was no calculated flattery in her expression. Only honest question. "You stopped Lord Pemberton because you believe in justice, too. Don't pretend otherwise." The presumption of it should have angered him. No one spoke to him like that. No one dared to suggest they understood his motivations. But instead of rage, he felt only a strange, hollow ache, The pain of being seen after years of careful invisibility. You don't know anything about me. I know you helped a servant and his protector when you could have walked past. Clara's voice softened slightly. I know that's worth something, even if you won't admit it. Before Adrian could respond, the ballroom doors opened with a ceremonial boom. The royal herald's voice rang out above the music. His Majesty the King requests the presence of all nobles in the throne room for an important announcement. The crowd began to flow toward the doors like a glittering river. Clara dropped another curtsy, this one genuine, Adrian thought, and turned to slip away through the servants' entrance. Miss Whitmore. She paused, glancing back over her shoulder. What is it you really want? Adrian asked the question before he could stop himself. Not in general. Tonight. Right now. If you could have anything. Clara was silent for a long moment, her gray eyes studying him with that same unsettling directness. For my brother to have enough to eat. For my mother to not have to work while she's sick. For the boy from tonight to not have nightmares about what almost happened to him. She tilted her head slightly. I notice you didn't ask what I want for myself, Your Grace. Just what I want. You assume I'd include myself in the answer, wouldn't you? A ghost of a smile touched her lips. I used to. Before I learned that wanting things for yourself is a luxury people like me can't afford. She disappeared through the servant's door before he could reply, leaving Adrian standing alone in the shadowed corner of the ballroom. His heart was pounding, actually pounding, like he'd run a mile, and he couldn't understand why. She was just a servant, a maid, a nobody in the grand scheme of his carefully constructed world. But she'd looked at him without fear, spoken to him without flattery, seen through him with an honesty that made him feel naked and exposed in a way that had nothing to do with desire and everything to do with recognition. Adrian pressed a hand to his chest, feeling the unfamiliar rhythm there. This was dangerous. This was stupid. This was the kind of distraction that could ruin everything he'd built. And he knew, with this terrible certainty of a man watching his own doom approach, that he was going to seek her out again. The throne room was packed with nobility, their perfumes mixing into a cloying fog that made Adrian's head ache. King Leopold III sat on his throne with the weary expression of a man who'd inherited a crown he never wanted. Beside him, Queen Adelaide looked bored, her attention fixed on her jeweled fan. My lords and ladies, the king began without preamble, I have received disturbing reports from the royal treasury. Over the past 2 years, significant sums have gone missing from tax revenues. Someone is stealing from the crown. The room erupted in whispers. Adrian kept his face carefully blank, but his mind was racing. He'd suspected something like this, had seen the signs in the kingdom's financial records he reviewed as part of the finance committee. But having the king announce it publicly meant the problem was worse than anyone had admitted. I am launching a formal investigation, King Leopold continued, his voice rising above the murmurs. Every noble family will be required to submit their financial records for review. Anyone found guilty of fraud will face execution for treason. More gasps, more whispers. Adrian watched the crowd carefully, cataloging reactions. Lord Ashford had gone pale. Duchess Hartwell was whispering urgently to her husband. Duke Ravencroft's expression was unreadable. Your Grace, the king's gaze found Adrian in the crowd. As chairman of the finance committee, you will lead this investigation. I trust you will be thorough. Of course, Your Majesty. Adrian bowed, hiding his irritation behind protocol. The king had just made him the most hated man in the kingdom. Anyone involved in the theft would now see him as their greatest threat. Anyone innocent would resent the intrusion into their private affairs. Perfect. Just what he needed. The king dismissed them with a wave, and the throne room emptied in a flurry of nervous conversation. Adrian lingered, watching the crowd flow past. Some avoided his gaze entirely. Others shot him looks of barely concealed hostility. He was contemplating the various ways this investigation could go catastrophically wrong when a familiar voice spoke behind him. You look like you're planning someone's murder. Adrian turned to find his cousin Marcus leaning against a pillar, a sardonic smile on his handsome face. Marcus Blackthorne was everything Adrian wasn't. Charming, beloved by society, content with his minor title and modest holdings. They'd grown up together, and Marcus was one of 3 people in the world Adrian actually trusted. Just considering my options, Adrian replied. That announcement made me the kingdom's most popular target. Marcus pushed off the pillar, his expression turning serious. You know what this means, right? Someone with serious resources has been systematically robbing the crown for years. That takes planning, coordination. Probably involves multiple noble families. I know. Adrian's jaw tightened. And the king just painted a target on my back and told me to go hunting. You could refuse. No, I couldn't. Adrian started walking toward the side exit, Marcus falling into step beside him. If I refuse, it looks like I'm involved. If I investigate and find nothing, I look incompetent. If I find something, I make powerful enemies. So it's a trap. Everything is a trap, Marcus. The trick is choosing which trap to walk into with your eyes open. They emerged into the palace's winter gardens, where frost-covered topiaries gleamed like ghost sculptures in the moonlight. The air was sharp and clean after the stifling throne room, and Adrian breathed deeply, trying to clear his head. There's something else, Marcus said quietly. I heard about what happened with Pemberton, about the servant girl. Adrian kept walking, his stride never faltering. Your point? My point is that everyone's talking about it. The Winter Duke defending a maid? That's not like you, Adrian. People are going to wonder why. Let them wonder. Marcus grabbed his arm, forcing him to stop. I'm serious. This investigation is going to put you under scrutiny like never before. Any weakness, any distraction, and your enemies will use it to destroy you. A servant girl is exactly the kind of vulnerability they'll exploit. Adrian pulled his arm free, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. She was protecting a child from being beaten. I won't apologize for stopping it. I'm not asking you to apologize. Marcus's expression was troubled. I'm asking you to be careful. You've built everything on being untouchable, Adrian. Don't give them a way to reach you now. Adrian turned away, looking out over the frozen gardens. In the distance, he could see the servants' quarters, small stone buildings clustered at the edge of the palace grounds. Was Clara there now? Was she thinking about their conversation, or had she already dismissed it as a strange but meaningless encounter? It was nothing, he said finally. A moment of conscience. It won't happen again. Marcus was silent for a long moment, then softer. You're lying to yourself. Adrian didn't answer, because Marcus was right. He was lying, and the worst part was, he didn't know what the truth was anymore. Bawut. 3 days later, Adrian found himself doing something he'd never done before, actively seeking out a servant. He told himself it was practical. The investigation required gathering information from unusual sources, and servants saw things nobles didn't. They moved invisibly through the palace, privy to conversations and secrets that the nobility assumed were private. If he wanted to find who was stealing from the crown, the staff might know more than they realized. This had nothing to do with gray eyes and fearless words. Nothing at all. He found Clara in the palace's main library, high on a ladder, dusting the upper shelves. She didn't notice him at first, too focused on her work. Adrian watched her for a moment, studying the careful, methodical way she moved, the small furrow of concentration between her brows. You're blocking the light. Clara gasped, nearly dropping her dustcloth. She spun around on the ladder, grabbing the shelf for balance, and found him standing directly below her. Your Grace. She pressed a hand to her chest, breathing hard. You shouldn't sneak up on people. I could have fallen. Then you should pay more attention to your surroundings. Clara's expression shifted from shock to annoyance in an instant. I was working, which is what servants do. Unlike some people who have nothing better to do than lurk in libraries scaring housemaids. Adrian felt the corner of his mouth twitch. Was that amusement? When was the last time someone had made him want to smile? I'll try to announce my presence more obviously next time, perhaps with trumpets. That would be appreciated. Clara climbed down the ladder with careful dignity, brushing dust from her apron. Is there something you need, Your Grace? I believe the book you want would be in the noble reading room, not the general library. I'm not here for a book. Clara's eyes narrowed slightly. Then why are you here? Good question. Adrian hadn't actually planned what to say. He'd just followed an impulse, which was so unlike him it was almost alarming. I need information for the investigation the king announced. From a housemaid? Clara crossed her arms, and Adrian was struck again by how naturally she held herself in his presence. Most servants couldn't maintain eye contact. She looked at him like an equal, which should have been insulting, but somehow wasn't. I don't know anything about noble finances, Your Grace, but you know about nobles. You see things they don't think servants notice. Her expression shifted, becoming more guarded. What kind of things? Patterns. Unusual behavior. Lords who spend far more than their estates should produce. Ladies who suddenly have jewelry they shouldn't be able to afford. Adrian took a step closer, and Clara held her ground. You protected that boy because you thought it was right. Don't you think finding who's stealing from the kingdom is right too? That money could feed families, build hospitals. Instead, it's making someone rich. Clara studied him for a long moment, and Adrian had the uncomfortable feeling she could see straight through his careful arguments to the real reason he'd sought her out. Finally, she sighed. Lord Ashford bought his daughter 3 new gowns last month, each one costing what most families make in a year. But his estate manager told the kitchen staff they need to cut costs because the harvest was poor. She ticked off points on her fingers. Duchess Hartwell had her entire townhouse redecorated, but she's 6 months behind paying the servants' wages. Duke Ravencroft commissioned a new carriage with gold fixtures, then claimed he couldn't afford to donate to the Winter Charity Fund. Adrian pulled out a small notebook, jotting down names. His mind was already racing, connecting patterns. These are exactly the kind of discrepancies I need. What else? Clara hesitated. If I help you with this, what happens to the families who depend on these nobles? The servants? If Lord Ashford is arrested, who feeds his staff? Who pays them? The question caught Adrian off guard. He'd been so focused on the investigation itself that he hadn't considered the collateral damage. That's not my concern. It should be. Claire's voice was quiet but firm. Justice that hurts innocent people isn't really justice at all. What would you have me do? Adrian heard the frustration creeping into his voice. Let them steal because punishing them is inconvenient? No. Clara met his gaze steadily. I'd have you think about what happens after. Make sure the servants are protected. Make sure they're paid fairly and treated well regardless of who their employer is. Otherwise, you're just replacing one kind of cruelty with another. Adrian stared at her, something uncomfortable shifting in his chest. When was the last time someone had challenged his assumptions? When had anyone dared to tell him he wasn't thinking broadly enough? You have an answer for everything, don't you? Not everything. Clara's lips quirked in a small smile. But I've learned that powerful people don't always see the consequences of their actions. Someone has to speak for those who can't speak for themselves. And you've appointed yourself to that role? Someone has to. Her eyes held his, and Adrian felt that strange crack in his chest widen further. Why not me? Before he could respond, footsteps echoed in the library entrance. Claire's expression immediately shifted, her posture changing to something more submissive as an older servant entered carrying a stack of books. Miss Whitmore, the woman called. Mrs. Patterson wants you in the kitchens. Yes, ma'am. Clara dropped a proper curtsy to Adrian. If you'll excuse me, Your Grace. She walked away without looking back, leaving Adrian standing among the dusty shelves with his notebook and his fractured certainty. He'd come here looking for information about the investigation. Instead, he'd found something far more dangerous, someone who made him want to be better than he was. Over the next week, Adrian found increasingly flimsy excuses to seek Clara out. He needed her insight on servant gossip. He wanted her perspective on noble behavior. He required her help identifying staff members who might have witnessed unusual activities. The truth was simpler and more terrifying. He couldn't stop thinking about her. It wasn't desire, not entirely. It was something deeper and more unsettling. Clara looked at him and saw not the Duke of Blackthorn, feared and hated in equal measure. She saw Adrian, a man who'd forgotten how to be human somewhere along the road to power. She challenged him, argued with him, refused to be impressed by his title or intimidated by his reputation. And somehow, impossibly, she was helping him solve the greatest corruption scandal in the kingdom's history. The pieces were coming together. Lord Ashford had approved false tax assessments for wealthy merchants in exchange for kickbacks. Duchess Hartwell had embezzled funds designated for road repairs, claiming the money went to construction that never happened. Duke Ravencroft ran a sophisticated scheme where he underreported harvest yields, sold the excess grain at market prices, and pocketed the difference. But there was something bigger here. Adrian could feel it. These nobles weren't smart enough or organized enough to pull this off alone. Someone was coordinating them. Someone with real power. He was poring over financial ledgers in his private study when a knock at the door interrupted him. It was nearly midnight, and he hadn't expected visitors. Enter. Clara stepped in, and Adrian felt his heart do something stupid and complicated in his chest. She was wearing her usual gray servant's dress, her hair braided back, but there was tension in her shoulders that set off alarm bells. Miss Whitmore. It's late. I know, I'm sorry, but I. She glanced behind her nervously. I found something you need to see. Adrian was on his feet immediately. What is it? Clara pulled a folded paper from her apron pocket. I was cleaning in the Duke of Ravencroft's private chamber tonight. He'd left this on his desk. I shouldn't have looked, but I saw your name and I. She thrust the paper at him. Just read it. Adrian unfolded the letter, his blood turning cold as he scanned the contents. It was a coded message, but he'd seen enough secret correspondence to recognize the pattern. Ravencroft was planning something involving Adrian specifically. And the letter was signed by someone inside the royal court, someone very close to the king. This is treason. Adrian looked up at Clara, seeing his own shock reflected in her eyes. They're not just stealing money, they're planning to use it to fund a coup. Clara nodded, her face pale. There's more. I've seen Lord Ashford meeting with Duchess Hartwell late at night, and yesterday I overheard Lady Pemberton, yes, the wife whose dress got wine-stained, talking about how everything would change once the new order was established. Whatever they're planning, it's happening soon. Adrian's mind raced. He needed to take this to the king immediately, but if there was a traitor in the royal court, he couldn't trust the normal channels. And if word got out about what Clara had done, if anyone knew she'd stolen this letter, you need to leave the palace. Tonight. Clara blinked. What? If they find out you took this, they'll kill you. Adrian was already moving, grabbing a small leather purse from his desk drawer. There's a coaching inn outside the city. The Silver Heart. Tell the proprietor you're under my protection. He'll give you a room and keep you safe until... I'm not running. Clara's voice was sharp, stopping him mid-movement. If what you say is true, they'll kill a lot more people than just me if they succeed. I'm not abandoning my family or the other servants just to save myself. Adrian wanted to shake her. This isn't about heroism. This is about survival. You've done your part. Now, no. Clara stepped closer, her gray eyes blazing. I don't know if you've noticed, Your Grace, but I've been surviving my entire life. Running won't change that. Helping you stop them might actually mean something. They stared at each other, the air between them crackling with tension. Adrian realized his hand was still holding the purse out to her, that they were standing close enough that he could see flecks of blue in her gray eyes, that his heart was pounding again with that unfamiliar, terrifying rhythm. You're impossible, he said finally. So I've been told. Clara didn't smile, but something in her expression softened. What do we do now? Now. Adrian folded the letter carefully and tucked it inside his jacket. We find proof of who's coordinating this. We have pieces, but we need the full picture before we can act. He met her gaze, letting her see the truth of what he was asking. This gets more dangerous from here. If you want out... I already told you I'm not running. Adrian nodded slowly. Then we work together. But Clara, you need to understand something. He took a breath, choosing his words carefully. If anyone finds out I'm spending time with you, they'll use it against both of us. The scandal alone could undermine everything we're trying to do. I know what I am, Your Grace. Clara's voice was quiet but steady. I'm a servant. You're a duke. The rules are very clear about people like us. I'm not expecting anything from you except that you do the right thing with the information I've given you. The words should have been reassuring. Instead, they felt like a knife between his ribs. Because somewhere in the past week, Adrian had started expecting more, wanting more. And Clara had just reminded him exactly why that was impossible. Of course, he said stiffly. I appreciate your assistance. Clara's expression flickered with something that might have been disappointment or relief. She curtsied, that mocking, technically correct curtsy, and turned toward the door. Clara. She paused, hand on the doorknob. Be careful. Adrian's voice was rougher than he'd intended. Please. She glanced back over her shoulder, and for just a moment, Adrian saw something vulnerable in her eyes, something that made his chest ache. You too, Your Grace. Then she was gone, and Adrian was alone with a treasonous letter, a half-formed plan, and the growing certainty that he'd just made the biggest mistake of his carefully controlled life. He was falling for a woman he could never have, and in the process, he was about to unleash a scandal that would either save the kingdom or destroy them both. The Royal Masquerade Ball was 3 weeks away. 3 weeks to gather proof. 3 weeks to identify the traitor in the king's court. 3 weeks before everything Adrian had built came crashing down. And somewhere in the palace, Clara Whitmore was returning to the servants' quarters, unaware that several pairs of eyes had watched her leave the Duke of Blackthorn's study, unaware that the trap was already closing around them both. The servants' quarters smelled like damp stone and old bread. Clara pushed open the door to the cramped room she shared with 3 other housemaids, her hands still trembling from the encounter in Adrian's study. The letter felt like it was burning through her apron, even though she'd left it with him, the weight of what she'd discovered pressing against her ribs like a physical thing. Sarah was already asleep in the corner bed, snoring softly. Margaret sat by the single candle, mending a torn petticoat. She looked up when Clara entered, her sharp eyes taking in everything. The flush on Clara's cheeks, the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers twisted in her apron. "You're back late." "Mrs. Patterson had me cleaning the upper library." Clara's voice came out steadier than she felt. The lie tasted like copper on her tongue. Margaret's needle paused mid-stitch. "The upper library. Where the Duke of Blackthorn has been spending his evenings." Clara felt ice slide down her spine. "I clean where I'm told to clean." "Of course you do." Margaret returned to her mending, but there was something in her tone that made Clara's skin prickle. "Just be careful, Clara. People are starting to talk. A duke who suddenly takes interest in where a particular maid is assigned? That's the kind of attention that ruins lives. There's nothing to talk about." Clara climbed into her narrow bed, turning her face to the wall. But her heart was hammering so hard she thought Margaret must hear it. She'd been careful. They'd both been careful. Except careful didn't matter when servants' lives depended on noticing everything their employers tried to hide. Sleep was impossible. Clara lay in the dark, listening to the breathing of the other maids, her mind replaying the moment Adrian had tried to give her money to run. The genuine fear in his eyes when he'd realized the danger she was in. The way his voice had roughened when he'd asked her to be careful. "You're a fool," she told herself savagely. "He's a duke. You're a servant. He'll use the information you gave him and forget you exist." Except she didn't believe that anymore. Somewhere between their first conversation and tonight, something had shifted. She'd seen past the reputation to the man underneath, the one who stopped bullies and worried about consequences and looked at her like she mattered. And that terrified her more than any conspiracy. Bayek. Adrian didn't sleep either. He sat at his desk until dawn. The treasonous letter spread before him, his mind mapping connections and probabilities. Ravencroft was involved. Ashford, Hartwell, Pemberton, but the handwriting on the letter wasn't any of theirs. Someone else was pulling the strings. Someone close to the king. The thought made his stomach turn. The royal court had maybe 20 people with that level of access. Lord Chancellor Whitfield, the king's private secretary, several high-ranking advisors. Any one of them could be the architect of this treason. And if Adrian moved against the wrong person, he'd be the one accused of plotting against the crown. "Your Grace." Adrian looked up to find his steward, Reynolds, standing in the doorway. The older man's expression was troubled. "What is it?" "There are visitors." Reynolds hesitated. "Lady Ashford and Duchess Hartwell. They're insisting on seeing you immediately." "At 6 in the morning?" Adrian felt his jaw tighten. "Send them away." "I tried. They said they'll wait in the front hall until you receive them." Adrian wanted to refuse anyway, but instinct stopped him. If Ashford and Hartwell's families were coming to him directly, something had changed. Either they knew he was investigating them, or something worse had happened. 5 minutes. "Show them to the drawing room." Reynolds bowed and disappeared. Adrian stood, straightening his coat, settling the mask of cold control back over his features. Whatever was coming, he'd face it the way he faced everything, with ice in his veins and steel in his spine. The 2 women were waiting in his drawing room, their elaborate morning gowns a stark contrast to the austere furnishings Adrian preferred. Lady Ashford looked nervous, her hands twisting in her lap. Duchess Hartwell wore the calculating expression of a woman who'd spent a lifetime navigating court politics. "Ladies." Adrian remained standing, a deliberate power play. "To what do I owe this unexpected visit? We need to speak frankly, Your Grace." Duchess Hartwell's voice was silk over iron. "There are rumors circulating about you, disturbing rumors. There are always rumors." "Not like this." Lady Ashford leaned forward, her eyes wide. "They're saying you've taken a particular interest in one of the palace servants. A maid." Adrian felt something cold and dangerous unfurl in his chest. His voice came out deadly quiet. "And why would my household staff arrangements interest you?" "Because it makes you look weak." Hartwell stood, moving closer. "A duke of your standing, Your Grace, cannot afford to be seen fraternizing with servants. It undermines your authority, makes people question your judgment. She paused, letting the words land. And in your position, leading the king's investigation, you cannot afford that kind of scrutiny. Adrian met her gaze without flinching. I fail to see how my conversations with staff members constitute fraternization. Oh, we're not talking about conversations. Lady Ashford's voice had taken on a sharp edge. We're talking about multiple private meetings, late-night visits to your study, the way you look at her in public. Half the palace staff has noticed, Your Grace. It's only a matter of time before the entire court knows. So tell me. Adrian took a step toward them, and both women instinctively retreated. What exactly are you suggesting I do about these rumors? Dismiss her. Duchess Hartwell recovered her composure quickly. Send her away from the palace entirely. Make it clear that whatever indiscretion occurred has been corrected. Do it publicly enough that people know you've taken the rumors seriously. And if I refuse? The Duchess smiled, and it was the smile of a predator scenting blood. Then the whispers get louder, Your Grace. Stories spread. Perhaps someone remembers seeing the girl leave your study late at night. Perhaps they recall how defensive you were of her during the Pemberton incident. Before long, every decision you make in this investigation will be viewed through the lens of impropriety. She tilted her head. Can you really afford that? When so much is at stake? Adrian understood the game immediately. They knew he was closing in on the corruption. They couldn't stop him directly. He was too powerful, too well connected. But they could undermine him, make him look compromised, turn his own investigation into a scandal about his personal conduct, and they were using Clara to do it. Get out. His voice was ice. Both of you, now. Your Grace, please. I said get out. Adrian moved to the door, yanking it open. And Lady Ashford, when I prove your husband has been embezzling from the crown, remember this conversation. Remember that you tried to blackmail me with lies and gossip because you were desperate. It won't save you. The women fled, their footsteps echoing in the hallway. Adrian slammed the door behind them, his hands shaking with rage. They'd weaponized Clara, turned her into a liability, and unless he found a way to protect her, they'd destroy her reputation just to get to him. He had to end this investigation quickly, before the scandal consumed them both. Clara was scrubbing the marble floors in the east wing when she heard the whispers. She'd gotten good at pretending not to notice when servants gossiped nearby. They assumed she couldn't hear or didn't care or was too stupid to understand. Did you hear about the Duke and that maid? Which maid? The Whitmore girl. Clara. Apparently she's been sneaking into his private study late at night. No, you're lying. I'm not. Margaret from the housekeeping staff saw her coming out of his rooms past midnight. Multiple times. Clara's hand stilled on the brush. Ice flooded her veins. What do you think they're doing in there? Oh, don't be naive. What do you think a duke does with a pretty servant girl behind closed doors? The gossip cut like broken glass. Clara wanted to stand up, to defend herself, to explain that she'd been helping with an investigation that could save the kingdom. But the words died in her throat, because she knew how this story would sound. A low-born maid and a powerful duke. No one would believe the truth. No one would even care. She finished scrubbing the floor in silence, her face burning with humiliation. Around her, the whispers continued. By noon, half the palace staff would know. By evening, it would reach the nobility. And by tomorrow, Clara Whitmore would be known as the Duke's whore. The unfairness of it made her want to scream. She'd risked everything to uncover treason. She'd put her life on the line to help Adrian stop a conspiracy that threatened the crown itself. And her reward was to have her reputation shredded by people who couldn't conceive that a servant might be valued for her mind instead of her body. Miss Whitmore. Clara looked up to find Mrs. Patterson, the head housekeeper, standing over her. The older woman's expression was granite. Come with me. Now. Clara stood, her heart sinking. She followed Mrs. Patterson through the palace corridors, feeling the eyes of other servants tracking her movement. The whispers followed her like a shadow. When they reached Mrs. Patterson's small office, the housekeeper shut the door with a sharp click. I've heard the rumors. Mrs. Patterson's voice was flat. I don't care if they're true or not. What I care about is that they're disrupting my staff and bringing shame on this household. I haven't done anything wrong. That's irrelevant. Mrs. Patterson sat behind her desk, folding her hands. Perception is reality in service, Clara. You should have learned that by now. And the perception is that you've been inappropriate with the Duke of Blackthorn. I've been helping him with, I don't want to hear it. The housekeeper's eyes were hard. Whatever your reasons, you've made yourself a liability. As of this moment, you're reassigned to the laundry rooms. You'll have no contact with any nobility, and you'll work hours that ensure you don't cross paths with the Duke. The laundry rooms were in the palace basement, hot and airless, where servants worked 14-hour shifts breathing in lye fumes. It was punishment detail, reserved for servants who'd committed serious infractions. For how long? Indefinitely. Mrs. Patterson's expression didn't soften. Consider yourself fortunate. If this were my decision alone, I'd dismiss you entirely. But the head steward thinks you deserve one more chance. Don't waste it. Clara felt rage and helplessness warring in her chest. This was exactly what Duchess Hartwell and Lady Ashford wanted. Isolate her, punish her, make it impossible for her to help Adrian with the investigation. The conspiracy was protecting itself by destroying anyone who threatened it. Can I at least send word to, No. You'll have no contact with the Duke of Blackthorn. If he asks about you, I'll inform him you've been reassigned. Now report to the laundry immediately. Clara walked out of the office with her head high, refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her break. But inside, something was crumbling. She'd been naive to think she could help. Naive to think a duke would see past her station. Naive to think justice mattered more than reputation. Most of all, she'd been naive to think Adrian would, or could, protect her from the consequences of standing beside him. But Adrian learned about Clara's reassignment from his steward at noon. The news hit him like a physical blow. On whose authority? Mrs. Patterson, Your Grace, with approval from the head of household staff. Apparently there's been talk. Inappropriate talk. They felt it best to remove temptation. Adrian stood so fast his chair toppled backward. Bring me Mrs. Patterson, now! Your Grace. Reynolds looked genuinely worried. If you intervene on this girl's behalf, it will only confirm the rumors. You'll make everything worse. I don't care. You should. Reynolds moved between Adrian and the door. Because Duchess Hartwell has already sent word to several gossip rags in the city. By tomorrow, there will be pamphlets on every street corner about the Winter Duke and his servant mistress. If you're seen defending her now, then what? Adrian's voice was dangerously quiet. I let them destroy an innocent woman to protect my reputation? I let corruption and fear dictate who I can associate with? Where does it end, Reynolds? It ends with you still having the power to finish this investigation. The steward's expression was pained. I know you care about this girl, but she's already lost this battle, Your Grace. Don't lose the war trying to save her. Adrian wanted to argue, wanted to storm down to the laundry rooms and drag Clara out of that hellhole. But Reynolds was right. Every action he took now would be scrutinized, twisted, used against them both. If he defended Clara publicly, he'd confirm exactly what their enemies wanted people to believe. He was trapped by his own power. Find out who's behind this, Adrian said finally. Not just Hartwell and Ashford. Someone coordinated this attack. I want to know who. Of course, Your Grace. And Reynolds? Adrian's eyes were cold. When this is over, when I've exposed everyone involved in this conspiracy, remind me to have a conversation with Mrs. Patterson about loyalty. The steward bowed and left. Adrian stood alone in his study, hands clenched at his sides, trying to master the rage that threatened to consume him. They'd backed him into a corner, made him choose between protecting Clara and completing the investigation. And they'd calculated correctly that he'd choose the investigation, because failing meant the coup would succeed, meant traitors would seize control of the kingdom, meant thousands would suffer under corrupt rule. But it also meant abandoning Clara to face this scandal alone. Adrian slammed his fist into the desk, feeling wood crack under the impact. He'd spent 6 years building walls around himself, convincing himself that emotions were weakness and isolation was strength. And now those same walls were crushing the first person who'd made him remember what it felt like to be human. There had to be another way. There had to be a solution that didn't require sacrificing her. He just had to find it before the masquerade ball, before everything came to a head, and he was forced to make a choice he'd regret for the rest of his life. 3 days passed. Clara scrubbed laundry in steaming water until her hands were raw and her back screamed. The other laundry maids avoided her, warned off by the scandal. At night, she collapsed in her bed too exhausted to even cry. She told herself she'd known this would happen, that she'd understood the risks, but understanding and experiencing were different countries, and the reality of public humiliation was so much worse than she'd imagined. On the 4th day, someone left a pamphlet on her bed. Clara stared at the crude illustration on the cover. A leering duke and a cowering maid, the image leaving nothing to imagination. The text below proclaimed, "The Winter Duke's Secret Shame, How a Servant Girl Seduced the Kingdom's Most Powerful Man." Her hands shook as she read. Every private conversation she'd had with Adrian twisted, every moment of genuine connection perverted. The pamphlet painted her as a scheming seductress who'd used her position to manipulate an honorable duke. It made Adrian look like a fool and her look like a whore. And there was nothing she could do about it. "Clara," a soft voice interrupted. She looked up to find her friend Beth standing in the doorway, eyes red from crying. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know they were going to—" "It's not your fault." Claire's voice was hollow. "Did they pay you for the information?" Beth's silence was answer enough. "How much?" 50 crowns. Beth's face crumpled. "My mother's sick. We needed the money for medicine. I didn't know what they'd do with it. I swear, Clara, I thought they just wanted gossip. I didn't know—" "Get out! Clara, please, get out!" Clara's voice cracked. "And don't come back." Beth fled, and Clara was alone again. 50 crowns. Her friendship had been bought for 50 crowns, the amount a noble family might spend on a single dinner party. She looked down at the pamphlet in her hands, at the crude drawing that would be plastered across every tavern and shop in the city, at the lies that would follow her for the rest of her life. And for the first time since this started, Clara wondered if she should have just let Pemberton beat that servant boy. If she should have kept her head down and her mouth shut. If trying to do the right thing was worth this kind of destruction. The thought made her feel sick, but she couldn't push it away. The masquerade ball was 2 days away when Marcus cornered Adrian in the palace corridor. "You look like death." Adrian hadn't slept in 3 days. He'd spent every waking hour gathering evidence, chasing leads, trying to identify the mastermind behind the conspiracy, and he was close. So close he could taste it, but not close enough. "We need to talk," Marcus said quietly. "Somewhere private." They ended up in the palace's abandoned east tower, where dust and cobwebs provided the only decoration. Marcus leaned against the stone wall, his expression more serious than Adrian had ever seen it. "The scandal's worse than you think. Pamphlets, street songs. There's a betting pool in 3 taverns about when you'll get Clara pregnant." Marcus ran a hand through his hair. "And the king's advisors are whispering that you're too compromised to lead the investigation." "Let them whisper. Adrian, you have to drop this." Marcus grabbed his arm. "Not the investigation. The girl. You have to publicly distance yourself before this destroys everything you've worked for." "I can't." "Why not? What is she to you that's worth—" "She's everything." The words erupted before Adrian could stop them. "She's the only person who looks at me and sees a human being instead of a title or a weapon. She risked her life to expose this conspiracy while nobles were too busy protecting their own interests. She has more courage and integrity in one finger than this entire court combined. And I'm supposed to abandon her because it's politically convenient?" Marcus stared at him. "You love her." Adrian opened his mouth to deny it. The denial died unspoken, because somewhere between the library conversation and the late-night confession and the moment she'd refused to run, it had become true. He loved Clara Whitmore. Loved her with a desperation that terrified him. Loved her in a way that made every political calculation and strategic consideration seem meaningless. And loving her was going to destroy them both. "Then marry her," Marcus said simply. Adrian laughed, the sound bitter. "Marry a servant? The scandal would be massive, would shock the kingdom, would also make her untouchable." Marcus moved closer, his eyes intent. "Right now she's vulnerable because she's nobody, a servant who can be dismissed and discarded. But if you marry her, she becomes Duchess of Blackthorn. Anyone who attacks her attacks your house. The scandal becomes your scandal, and you control the narrative." Adrian's mind raced. It was insane. Unprecedented. A duke marrying a servant would violate every social convention. The nobility would be apoplectic. The king himself might intervene. But Marcus was right. Marriage would protect Clara in ways nothing else could. "The ball," Adrian said slowly. "The masquerade. That's when they're planning to move against us. I can feel it." "Then move first." Marcus's expression was fierce. "Stand up in front of the entire court and claim her. Expose the conspiracy and announce your engagement in the same breath. Make it impossible for them to attack her without revealing their own guilt. It could backfire." If we don't have enough evidence, then you better make sure you do. Marcus clasped his shoulder. 2 days, Adrian. Find the proof you need, and then blow this whole thing wide open. Adrian nodded slowly. It was risky, possibly suicidal. But it was the only path forward that didn't end with Clara destroyed, and the conspiracy triumphant. He just had to survive the next 48 hours. But Clara was hauling a basket of wet linens up from the laundry when she heard her name called. She turned to find a young page boy, barely 10, holding an envelope sealed with black wax. For you, miss. He thrust it at her and ran before she could ask who'd sent it. Clara looked around, but the corridor was empty. She broke the seal with trembling fingers and unfolded the letter. The handwriting was familiar, sharp, precise. Adrian's. Clarison, I know you've been told not to contact me. I know the rumors have made your life hell. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from right now. But I need you to trust me one more time. The masquerade ball. Come as a guest, not a servant. I'll have a gown and mask delivered to you tomorrow. Wear them. Enter through the main hall, not the servants' entrance. What I'm about to do will either save us both or destroy us completely, but I won't do it without you there. If you don't come, I'll understand. You've already sacrificed more than anyone had the right to ask. But if you trust me, if you believe what we found together matters, be there. Clara read the letter 3 times, her heart pounding. He wanted her at the masquerade, not as a servant hiding in the shadows, as a guest, where everyone could see her. It was madness. It would confirm every rumor, make the scandal exponentially worse, probably get her thrown out of the palace forever. But Adrian was asking, and despite everything, despite the humiliation and the gossip and the betrayal, she still believed he was trying to do the right thing. She tucked the letter inside her dress, next to her heart, and made her decision. She'd go. She'd trust him one last time, and whatever happened at that ball would determine both their fates. Maid. The gown arrived the next evening, delivered by a silent courier who disappeared before Claire could ask questions. She opened the box in the privacy of her room, and her breath caught. It was midnight blue silk, simple but elegant, with silver embroidery that caught the light. The mask was silver filigree, delicate as lace. There were shoes, gloves, everything she'd need to pass as a noble woman. Clara ran her fingers over the fabric, her throat tight. Adrian had done this, had risked even more scandal to make sure she had what she needed. The gesture was so tender, so thoughtful, that she wanted to cry. Margaret watched from her bed, expression unreadable. You're really going? Yes. They'll destroy you. They already have. Clara met her former friend's eyes steadily. What more can they take? Margaret was silent for a long moment, then softer. Be careful, Clara. Whatever the Duke's planning, it won't end well. Men like him don't marry girls like us. They use us and discard us when we become inconvenient. Clara knew she was right, knew the odds were against her, but she also knew that Adrian was different from the other nobles. That somewhere beneath the Winter Duke's reputation was a man who cared about justice and protecting the vulnerable. She had to believe that, because if she couldn't believe in him, she couldn't believe in anything. The night of the masquerade arrived. Adrian stood in his private chambers, adjusting his black and silver mask, trying to control the anxiety clawing at his chest. Everything hinged on tonight. He'd spent the past 2 days gathering the final pieces of evidence, and what he'd found was worse than he'd imagined. The conspiracy wasn't just about stealing money, it was about systematic corruption that reached into every level of government. And the man coordinating it all was someone Adrian had trusted. Lord Chancellor Whitfield, the king's oldest advisor, a man who'd served the crown for 30 years. The evidence was damning, coded letters, bank records showing massive transfers, testimony from servants who'd witnessed secret meetings. Whitfield had been orchestrating the theft, using nobles like Ravencroft and Ashford as pawns, while he positioned himself to seize power when the kingdom's finances collapsed. And tonight, Adrian was going to expose him in front of the entire court. He just had to hope Clara showed up, because he couldn't do this without her. The ballroom was already packed when he arrived, 300 masked nobles swirling in an elaborate dance. Adrian moved through the crowd, his eyes scanning for midnight blue silk and a silver mask. She wasn't there yet. Doubts assailed him. What if she'd decided not to come? What if the scandal had broken her? What if he'd pushed too far, asked too much, and she'd finally realized that staying away from him was the smart choice? Your Grace, Duchess Hartwell appeared at his elbow, resplendent in emerald and gold. Looking for someone? Just enjoying the festivities? Of course. Her smile was poison. Though I hear your little servant friend won't be attending. Apparently she's learned her place at last. Such a relief. These summer romances can be so tedious. Adrian's jaw tightened, but he forced himself to smile. The evening's young yet, Duchess. Anything could happen. He moved away before she could respond, his heart sinking. Maybe Clara wasn't coming. Maybe he'd lost her before he'd even had the chance to... The herald's voice rang out above the music. Lady Clara Whitmore. The ballroom went silent. Every head turned toward the entrance, and there she was. Clara stood at the top of the marble stairs in the midnight blue gown, silver mask glittering in the candlelight. She looked terrified and fierce and absolutely breathtaking. Around her, Adrian heard gasps, whispers, the rising tide of scandal. He didn't care. He only had eyes for her. Clara descended the stairs with careful dignity, even as the crowd parted around her like she carried plague. Nobles whispered behind their masks, their shock and outrage palpable. This was a woman who had no business being here, dressed as one of them. This was a scandal that would echo for years. Adrian moved forward, cutting through the crowd. He saw Clara's eyes find his, saw the flash of relief and terror in equal measure, and he made his choice. He stopped directly in front of her, in the center of the ballroom where everyone could see. Then, slowly and deliberately, he bowed. Miss Whitmore, you look beautiful. The whispers exploded into outright conversation. Someone gasped. A woman fainted. But Adrian didn't look away from Clara's face, from the tears gathering in her gray eyes. Your Grace, she whispered, you shouldn't... I should. I will. Adrian straightened, offering his hand. Dance with me. Clara's hand trembled as she placed it in his. The musicians, confused but obedient, started a waltz. And in front of 300 scandalized nobles, the Duke of Blackthorn led a servant girl onto the dance floor. This is insane, Clara breathed as they began to move. Everyone's staring. Let them. Adrian pulled her closer, breaking protocol. I'm done hiding. Done apologizing for seeing your worth when they're too blind to recognize it. They'll use this against you. They already have. His voice was low, fierce. And I don't care anymore. All these years I thought power meant standing alone, being untouchable. But you've taught me something different. Real power is standing beside someone and refusing to let the world tear you apart. Clara's eyes were wide behind the mask. Adrian. Before he could respond, a commotion erupted at the ballroom entrance. King Leopold strode in, his face thunderous, with Lord Chancellor Whitfield at his side. The music died. The dancing stopped. Duke Blackthorn. The king's voice cracked like a whip. Explain yourself. Now. This was it. The point of no return. Adrian released Clara's hand, stepping forward to face the king. But he didn't move away from her, didn't create distance. Instead, he reached back and took her hand again, pulling her to stand beside him. Together. They'd face this together. Your Majesty. Adrian's voice rang clear across the silent ballroom. I have evidence of systematic corruption and treason against the crown. Evidence that will shock this court and reveal the true nature of the conspiracy you asked me to investigate. The king's eyes narrowed. Present it. Adrian pulled the sealed documents from his jacket. But these aren't just financial records, Your Majesty. These are proof of a conspiracy that reaches the highest levels of your government. And the man responsible... He turned, his gaze locking on Lord Chancellor Whitfield. Is standing right beside you. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Whitfield's face went white, then red with fury. The king looked between them, confusion and dawning horror warring on his features. This is madness, Whitfield sputtered. Your Majesty, the Duke has clearly been compromised by his inappropriate relationship with this servant girl. He's desperate to deflect attention from his own scandal. Then explain these. Adrian strode forward, handing the documents directly to the king. Your signature forged on transfer orders. Your seal stolen and used to authorize fraudulent accounts. Your trust exploited to rob the kingdom blind. The king read, his face growing darker with each page. Around them, nobles pressed closer, desperate to hear. Clara stood frozen where Adrian had left her, the center of every hostile gaze. And then Whitfield moved. Fast as a snake, he grabbed the queen, pulling a hidden blade to her throat. Nobody move, the Lord Chancellor snarled, or I kill her right here. The ballroom dissolved into screaming chaos. Guards rushed forward but stopped when Whitfield pressed the blade closer, drawing a thin line of blood. The queen's eyes were wide with terror. Adrian felt everything slow down. This was the moment. The choice that would define everything that came after. He could protect the investigation. Or he could protect Clara. He couldn't do both. And without hesitation, he moved. Not toward Whitfield. Toward Clara, pushing her behind him, shielding her with his body as guards closed in on the traitor. "I said don't move!" Whitfield's voice was frantic now. "I'll kill her, I swear I'll—" He never finished. Marcus appeared from the crowd, moving with the lethal grace of a trained fighter. His blade flashed once, and Whitfield's knife clattered to the floor. The queen stumbled free as guards swarmed the Lord Chancellor, forcing him to his knees. It was over in seconds, but the consequences would last forever. The king stood slowly, his face a mask of fury and betrayal. He looked at Whitfield, his friend, his advisor, his most trusted counselor, and Adrian saw something break in the monarch's eyes. "Take him to the dungeons," the king said quietly. "And bring me everyone named in those documents. Tonight." Guards dragged Whitfield away, the Lord Chancellor screaming threats and denials. The nobles watched in stunned silence, and Adrian turned to find Clara still standing behind him, her hand clutched in his, both of them shaking with adrenaline and shock. "We did it," she whispered. "It's over." But Adrian knew better. He could see it in the king's expression, in the horrified faces of the surrounding nobility, in the way guards were looking at Clara with open hostility. The conspiracy was exposed, the traitors would face justice. But the scandal had just begun, and there was no going back now. The dungeons beneath Thornhill Palace smelled like fear and old stone. Adrian stood outside the iron bars of Whitfield's cell, watching the former Lord Chancellor pace like a caged wolf. 3 days had passed since the masquerade. 3 days of interrogations, arrests, and revelations that shook the kingdom to its foundations. But something was wrong. Adrian could feel it in his bones. "You look troubled, Your Grace." Whitfield's voice dripped with mockery despite his chains. "Having second thoughts about your glorious victory?" Adrian studied the older man's face, searching for cracks in the facade. Whitfield should be broken by now, defeated. Instead, he looked almost satisfied. "The evidence is overwhelming." Adrian kept his voice flat. "You'll hang for treason." "Will I?" Whitfield moved closer to the bars, his eyes glittering in the torchlight. "Or will I be the scapegoat while the real architects walk free?" The words sent ice down Adrian's spine. "What are you talking about?" "You think you're so clever." Whitfield's smile was a wound, the brilliant Duke of Blackthorn, exposing corruption and saving his servant girl. A fairy tale ending. "Except you forgot one critical thing." "What?" "You can't see betrayal coming from the people you trust most." Before Adrian could respond, footsteps echoed in the corridor. Marcus appeared, his face pale and strained. "Adrian, we need to talk, now." They climbed back to the palace proper in silence. Adrian's instincts were screaming warnings he couldn't yet name, something about Marcus's posture, the tension in his jaw, the way he wouldn't meet Adrian's eyes. "What is it?" Adrian demanded once they were alone in a private chamber. Marcus pulled out a leather folder, his hands shaking slightly. "I've been helping with the investigation, going through Whitfield's correspondence, and I found something you need to see before anyone else does." He opened the folder. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all in the same handwriting Adrian had studied for weeks, his father's handwriting. Adrian felt the ground tilt beneath him. "What is this?" "Your father was involved." Marcus's voice was hollow. 6 years ago, before he died, he helped Whitfield set up the initial framework for the embezzlement scheme. The shell companies, the false accounts, all of it traces back to the old Duke of Blackthorn. "No." The word came out strangled. Adrian grabbed the letters, scanning them frantically. His father's signature, his father's seal. Plans laid out in meticulous detail for stealing from the crown over decades. "It gets worse." Marcus pulled out another document. "When your father died, the conspiracy didn't end. Someone continued it. Someone who had access to all his records and connections. Someone Whitfield trusted implicitly to carry on the work." Adrian looked up, and in Marcus's eyes he saw everything he needed to know. The truth he'd been blind to. The betrayal that had been hidden in plain sight. "You." Marcus flinched but didn't deny it. I didn't have a choice. Your father made me swear. You're lying. Adrian's voice was deadly quiet. My father would never. Your father was desperate. Marcus's composure cracked. The estate was drowning in debt. Creditors were circling. He needed money fast or the Blackthorn name would be destroyed. So he made a deal with Whitfield. Help steal from the crown, get a cut of the profits, save the family legacy. Every word was a knife. Adrian tried to process what he was hearing, but his mind kept rejecting it. His father had been stern, cold, demanding. But a traitor? A thief? Why are you telling me this now? Because Claire is about to find out. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, looking genuinely anguished. She's been helping gather evidence in the servants' quarters, talking to staff who worked here 6 years ago. She's close to discovering the truth about your father. And when she does, she'll expose it. Adrian finished the thought, nausea churning in his gut. She'll destroy the Blackthorn name to complete the investigation. Marcus nodded. Unless you stop her first. The room went silent. Adrian understood the choice being laid before him. Protect his father's reputation and by extension his own legacy. Or let Clara uncover the truth and watch everything he'd inherited turn to ashes. There's another option. Marcus's voice dropped to a whisper. Whitfield dies tonight. An accident. Or suicide. Whatever story we choose. Without him alive to confirm it, these letters are just forgeries. Questions without answers. The investigation closes. Your father's name stays clean. The Blackthorn legacy survives. And Clara? Marcus's expression hardened. Has to be dealt with. She knows too much. If she keeps digging... No! Adrian's voice cut like a blade. Adrian, be realistic. You can't have both. You can't protect her and protect your family name. One of them has to burn. Adrian felt something fundamental break inside him. This was the test he'd been running from his whole life. The moment when love collided with legacy, when the choice became binary and brutal. He could save Clara or save himself. Not both. Get out. What? I said get out. Adrian's hands were shaking with rage or fear or both. Before I do something we'll both regret. Marcus held his ground for a moment, then nodded slowly. You have until tomorrow morning. After that, I'm taking this to the king. He paused at the door. I'm sorry, Adrian, but you can't build a future on lies, and you can't protect someone who's determined to destroy you. He left. Adrian stood alone, surrounded by evidence of his father's treason, his cousin's betrayal, and the impossible choice that would define the rest of his life. What? Clara was in the palace archives, dusty ledgers spread across a table, when Adrian found her. She looked up with a smile that died the moment she saw his face. What's wrong? We need to talk. Adrian's voice was raw. About the investigation. Clara stood, concern etched in her features. Did something happen? Did they find more evidence? In a manner of speaking, Adrian moved to the window, unable to look at her directly. What would you do if you discovered that someone you loved was guilty? That exposing the truth meant destroying them completely? Clara was quiet for a long moment. I tell the truth anyway. Because that's what justice means, no exceptions. She moved closer. Adrian, what did you find? He turned to face her, and the pain in his eyes made her step back. My father. He was part of the conspiracy. One of the original architects. Clara's hand flew to her mouth. Oh, God. I inherited everything he stole. Everything I've built. Every advantage I've had. It's all tainted. Adrian's laugh was bitter. The Winter Duke. The kingdom's most powerful man. Built on blood money and treason. That's not your fault. Clara reached for him, but he moved away. You didn't know. Doesn't matter. Adrian's voice hardened. Once this comes out, the crown will seize everything. The estate, the title, everything my family has held for generations, and I'll be lucky if they don't hang me beside Whitfield. Then we'll fight it. Clara's voice was fierce. You weren't involved. You exposed the conspiracy. That has to count for something. It won't. Adrian finally met her eyes. Not when the evidence shows Blackthorn money has been funding treason for 6 years. Not when nobles I've ruined demand vengeance. Not when the king needs someone to blame for the fact that his most trusted advisor was stealing from him. So what are you saying? I'm saying you have to stop investigating. Adrian heard the words leave his mouth and hated himself for them. Let it end here. Whitfield was the mastermind. The others were his pawns. That's the story. That's what saves the kingdom without tearing it apart. Clara stared at him like he'd grown a second head. You want me to lie? To cover up your father's crimes? I want you to survive. Adrian's desperation bled through. Because if you expose this, they'll turn on you too. You're already a scandal, already a target. If you're the one who destroys the Blackthorn name, they'll make sure you pay for it in ways that will make the pamphlets look kind. I don't care. Well, I do. The words exploded from him. I care if you live or die. I care if you're destroyed because you helped me. I care more about you than I do about justice or truth or any of the principles we've been fighting for. The silence that followed was suffocating. Clara's eyes filled with tears, but her voice stayed steady. You're asking me to choose you over what's right. I'm asking you to choose survival. Adrian took her hands, and she let him, though her fingers stayed limp in his grip. We could leave. Tonight. Take what money I have left and disappear. Start over somewhere no one knows us. Forget about courts and conspiracies and crowns. Just be together. As what? Clara pulled her hands free. As a duke and his mistress, living in exile, looking over our shoulders forever? That's not a life, Adrian. That's running. Then we'll run. I don't care anymore. Adrian heard the pleading in his voice and couldn't stop it. I don't care about the title or the power or the legacy. I just want you safe. Clara's face crumpled. You think I don't want that too? You think I haven't imagined what it would be like to just walk away from all this? But I can't, Adrian, because if we do, then Whitfield was right. Justice only matters when it's convenient. Truth only counts when it doesn't cost us anything. Even if it costs us everything? Yes. Clara's voice broke. Even then. Adrian felt something die in his chest. The hope he'd been clinging to. The fantasy that love could somehow overcome reality. He'd known from the beginning that Clara's integrity was absolute, that she'd choose truth over safety every time. It was one of the things he loved most about her, and now it was going to destroy them both. Then I can't protect you. The words tasted like ash. When this comes out, I won't be able to shield you from what follows. You'll be the servant girl who seduced a duke and then destroyed his family. They'll write songs about your betrayal for generations. I know. Tears streamed down Clara's face. But at least they'll be true. She walked past him toward the door, her spine straight despite the tears. Adrian wanted to call her back, wanted to beg her to reconsider, wanted to shake her until she understood that principles meant nothing if you were dead. But he knew it wouldn't matter. Clara had made her choice, and in doing so, she'd forced him to make his. Marcus was waiting in Adrian's study when he returned. The expression on his cousin's face said he already knew how the conversation had gone. She won't stop. It wasn't a question. No. Adrian moved to the desk, pulling out paper and ink. Which means we do this the hard way. You're really going through with it? Marcus sounded genuinely surprised. Even knowing what it means, Adrian began to write, his hands steady despite the tremors running through his body. I spent 6 years building walls, keeping everyone at arm's length, telling myself that isolation was strength, and then Clara walked into my life and made me remember what it felt like to be human, to care about something more than power. He looked up at Marcus, and his eyes were empty. But you were right. You can't build a future on lies, and you can't love someone who's determined to destroy you, so I'm going to do what I should have done from the beginning. I'm going to survive. What are you writing? A confession. Adrian's pen moved across the paper. From Clara Whitmore. Admitting that she fabricated evidence against my father to frame him posthumously, that she manipulated me using our relationship to gain access to family records she could doctor, that she's actually working with Whitfield, and the entire scandal was designed to destroy the Blackthorn name. Marcus went pale. That's insane. No one will believe it. They will when I present forged letters in her handwriting, documents showing payments from Whitfield to her family, testimony from servants who will swear they saw her stealing papers from my study. Adrian kept writing, his heart turned to stone. The truth is whatever story has the most evidence, and I'm very good at creating evidence. You'll ruin her. Marcus's voice was hollow. Completely. Yes? Adrian signed the document with a flourish. And in exchange, my father's name stays clean. The Blackthorn legacy survives, and Clara Whitmore becomes the villain of this story instead of me. He stood gathering the papers. The beautiful thing about being the Duke of Blackthorn is that people believe me. They want to believe me. A trusted duke seduced and betrayed by a scheming servant? That's a story they can understand. It confirms everything they already think about class and power and the natural order of things. And when Clara denies it, her word against mine. Adrian's smile was a razor. Who do you think the king will believe? Marcus stared at him like he was looking at a stranger. What happened to you? 3 days ago, you were ready to burn the kingdom down to protect her. Now you're framing her for treason? 3 days ago, I was an idealistic fool who thought love could overcome politics. Adrian moved toward the door. Now I'm a survivor, just like my father, just like every Duke of Blackthorn before me. We do whatever it takes to preserve the family name, even if it means sacrificing the people we love. He stopped at the threshold, looking back at Marcus. Get it done. I want Clara arrested before dawn. And make sure the charges are public. I want everyone in the kingdom to know that she betrayed me. Marcus nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. As you command, Your Grace. Adrian walked out, the papers clutched in his hand, and felt nothing. The ice was back. The walls were rebuilt. The Winter Duke had returned, and he would never make the mistake of carrying again. Behind him, Marcus waited until the footsteps faded. Then he pulled out his own sheet of paper and began to write a very different letter. Because Marcus had been many things in his life. A gambler, a liar, a man who'd helped perpetuate his uncle's treason for 6 years. But watching his cousin sacrifice the only good thing in his life to save a legacy built on corruption, that was a bridge too far. Clara was in her room packing the few possessions she owned when the guards came. She'd known this was coming, known that exposing Adrian's father would paint a target on her back. But she'd made her peace with it hours ago. Justice required sacrifice. Truth demanded courage. And sometimes doing the right thing meant losing everything. Clara Whitmore, the captain's voice was formal. You're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and treason against the crown. Clara stood calmly, holding out her wrists for the chains. I understand. The other servants watched in silence as she was led away. Some looked triumphant, others pitying. None looked surprised. This was the natural order reasserting itself. Servants who overreached got crushed. That was how the world worked. They took her to the dungeons, to a cell not far from where Whitfield was held. The stone walls wept moisture, and the air tasted like despair. Clara sat on the narrow bench, wrapped her arms around herself, and tried not to think about Adrian's face when he'd asked her to lie. She understood why he'd done it, understood the impossible position she'd put him in, but understanding didn't make it hurt less. She'd fallen in love with a man who could never choose her over his legacy, and now they'd both pay the price. Hours passed, maybe days. Time lost meaning in the dark. Clara drifted between waking and sleeping, her mind replaying every moment with Adrian, searching for the point where it had all gone wrong, wondering if she'd made the right choice. When the cell door finally opened, she expected guards. Instead, Marcus stepped through. You, Clara's voice was flat. Come to gloat? Marcus knelt in front of her, and there was genuine anguish in his eyes. I'm going to get you out, but you need to listen very carefully because we don't have much time. Why would you help me? Because Adrian's about to make the biggest mistake of his life. Marcus pulled out papers from inside his coat. He's going to frame you, make you the villain to protect his father's name, and I can't let that happen. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Even after everything, the confirmation of Adrian's betrayal cut deep. So stop him. I can't. Not alone. Marcus spread the papers on the cell floor. These are the real financial records, the ones that prove everything. Your father's involvement, Adrian's inheritance of stolen wealth, the full scope of the conspiracy. He looked up at her. If I give these to the king, Adrian loses everything. But if you give them to him, there's a chance. A chance for what? For Adrian to choose truth over legacy. Marcus's voice was urgent. He's not thinking clearly. He's terrified of losing you and losing the family name at the same time, so he's convinced himself that destroying you is the only option. But if you confront him, if you show him that you're willing to expose everything including yourself, he'll realize framing me won't actually save him. Clara understood. Because the evidence still exists. Exactly. And more importantly, he'll have to face what he's become. Marcus stood, offering his hand. The man I grew up with wasn't a coward. Wasn't someone who sacrificed innocent people to save his reputation. But 6 years of isolation and fear have turned him into something else. something that would horrify him if he could see it clearly. Clara took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet. Why are you doing this? You helped perpetuate the conspiracy. You're as guilty as anyone. I know. Marcus's smile was bitter. And I'll pay for it. But maybe I can do one decent thing before I do. Maybe I can save my cousin from becoming the monster he thinks he needs to be. He led her out of the cell through a passage Clara hadn't known existed. They moved through dark tunnels beneath the palace, Marcus navigating from memory. Behind them, shouts echoed as guards discovered her empty cell. Where are we going? The one place Adrian won't expect. Marcus pushed open a hidden door. His private study, where he's meeting with the king in an hour to present his false evidence against you. They emerged in a storage room near the ducal wing. Marcus pressed the papers into Clara's hands. Confront him. Make him see what he's doing, and pray that the man you fell in love with is still in there somewhere. What about you? I'm going to the king. Marcus's expression was resolute. Going to confess my part in all of this. Maybe my testimony will help convince him to show mercy when Adrian's world comes crashing down. Clara grabbed his arm. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Marcus pulled away gently. This might not work. Adrian's pretty far gone, and even if you reach him, the consequences will destroy you both. But at least it'll be honest destruction, not built on lies. He disappeared back into the tunnel, leaving Clara alone with the evidence that would condemn the man she loved. She looked down at the papers in her hands, at the careful documentation of 6 years of treason. Then she looked toward the study where Adrian was planning her destruction, and she made her choice. Not the smart one, not the safe one, but the only one she could live with. She was going to force Adrian to see the truth, even if it killed them both. Yes, Adrian stood before King Leopold, the forged confession laid out on the desk between them. His face was a mask of righteous betrayal, his voice steady as he explained how Clara had manipulated him, how she'd seduced him to gain access to family records, how she'd fabricated evidence to frame his father posthumously. The king listened in silence, his expression unreadable. When Adrian finished, Leopold sat back in his chair with a heavy sigh. This is quite a tale, Your Grace. Every word is supported by evidence. Adrian gestured to the documents. Letters, payments, witness testimony? Yes. Leopold's eyes were sharp. Very thorough evidence. Almost too thorough for something you supposedly just discovered. Your Majesty? Let me tell you what I think happened. The king stood, moving to the window. I think you found out your father was part of Whitfield's conspiracy. I think Clara was about to expose it, and I think you panicked. Adrian's blood ran cold. Your Majesty, I assure you, I'm not finished. Leopold turned, and his gaze was steel. I've been king for 30 years, Blackthorn. I've seen every kind of lie and manipulation this court can produce. And this? This reeks of a desperate man trying to save his legacy at any cost. The evidence is real. Oh, I'm sure some of it is. Leopold moved closer. The trick with good lies is mixing truth and fiction, but you made one mistake. What? Clara Whitmore has spent her entire life in service. Dozens of people can vouch for her character, for her integrity. And you expect me to believe she suddenly became a master manipulator capable of forging documents and orchestrating conspiracies? He shook his head. The girl who protected a servant boy from being beaten, that's who I choose to believe. Adrian felt the walls closing in. Your Majesty, you can't... The door slammed open. Adrian spun to find Clara standing there, papers clutched in her hands, guards trying to grab her, but she moved past them, her gray eyes locked on his face. Don't. Her voice cut through the chaos. Don't do this, Adrian. Miss Whitmore, the king's voice was sharp. How did you escape custody? That's not important. Clara moved to the desk, spreading out the real evidence. What's important is the truth. All of it. Adrian felt something crack in his chest as he looked at her. She was disheveled, tear-stained, clearly exhausted, but her spine was straight and her voice was steady. And in her eyes he saw everything he'd been trying to escape. His own reflection, the monster he'd become. These are the real financial records, Clara continued, addressing the king. The ones that prove the Duke of Blackthorn's father was part of the initial conspiracy. The ones that show Adrian inherited stolen wealth. The ones that reveal the full scope of the treason. She turned to Adrian, and her voice softened. And the ones that prove you had no knowledge of any of it until 3 days ago. That you were investigating in good faith. that you genuinely tried to expose corruption even when it threatened everything you valued. Adrian stared at her, unable to process what he was hearing. You're defending me? After what I tried to do to you? I'm defending the truth. Claire's eyes filled with tears. Even when it hurts. Even when it costs everything. Because that's what you taught me. That's what you were trying to do before fear made you forget who you are. The king took the papers, scanning them quickly. His expression grew darker with each page. This is extensive. It's everything. Claire's voice never wavered. The full conspiracy from beginning to end, including my own role in gathering evidence, including the fact that I fell in love with the Duke of Blackthorn, and that might have compromised my objectivity. The room went silent. Adrian felt tears burning in his eyes for the first time in years. She was sacrificing herself to save him, exposing everything, including her own vulnerability, refusing to lie even when it would have been so easy. She was everything he'd thought he could never afford to be. Honest, brave, good. And he'd tried to destroy her for it. Your Majesty, Adrian's voice came out broken. Everything Miss Whitmore said is true. My father was a traitor. I inherited stolen wealth. And when I found out, I tried to frame an innocent woman to protect my legacy. He dropped to his knees, the full weight of what he'd almost done crashing over him. I'm guilty of conspiracy after the fact, of obstruction of justice, of attempted false imprisonment. Do with me what you will, but Clara is innocent. She's always been innocent. King Leopold looked between them for a long moment. Then he moved to his desk and rang a bell. Guards appeared immediately. Arrest Duke Blackthorn, the king commanded. He's to be held pending a full investigation into his family's crimes. He looked at Clara. As for you, Miss Whitmore, you're free to go. With my gratitude for your service to the crown, Your Majesty, Clara stepped forward. If I may, don't punish Adrian for his father's sins. He didn't know. And when he found out, he tried to do the right thing. He just lost his way for a moment. He tried to frame you for treason. I know, Claire's voice was quiet, and that's something he'll have to live with. But it doesn't erase everything he did before that. The investigation he led, the conspiracy he exposed, the justice he sought even when it hurt. The king was silent for a long moment. Then he looked at Adrian, still kneeling, tears streaming down his face. You're a lucky man, Blackthorn, to have someone willing to show you mercy after what you tried to do. I don't deserve it. Adrian's voice was hollow. No. But mercy isn't about deserving. Leopold's expression softened slightly. You're stripped of your title and lands. The crown will seize all assets connected to your father's crimes. You'll be banished from court indefinitely, and you'll spend the rest of your life knowing that you survived only because a servant girl you tried to destroy chose to save you anyway. He gestured to the guards. Take him away. And someone find Marcus Blackthorn. I believe he has a confession to make. As guards hauled Adrian to his feet, he looked at Clara one last time. Her face was composed, but he could see the pain in her eyes, the love that somehow still existed despite everything he'd done. I'm sorry, he whispered, for all of it. I know, Clara replied, and someday, maybe that will be enough. They led him away. Behind him, he heard Clara begin to cry, quiet sobs that tore at what remained of his heart. He'd lost everything. Title, wealth, legacy. But the worst loss was standing in that room, weeping for a man who'd proven he didn't deserve her tears. Adrian had faced the test he'd been running from his whole life, the moment when he had to choose between love and legacy. And he'd chosen wrong. Now he'd spend the rest of his life learning to live with that choice, learning to be the man Clara had believed he could be, learning that some betrayals couldn't be forgiven, even by the people who loved you most. The Winter Duke was dead. In his place was just Adrian, broken, ashamed, and finally, terribly human. The cell was smaller than Adrian remembered, darker. The stone walls pressed in like a tomb, and the air tasted like copper and regret. He sat on the narrow bench with his head in his hands, listening to the sound of his own breathing. 3 days since his arrest. 3 days since he'd seen the look on Clara's face when they dragged him away. 3 days to understand that losing everything meant finally seeing what mattered. The door scraped open. Adrian didn't look up, assuming it was another guard with stale bread and tepid water. Instead, a familiar voice cut through the darkness. You look like hell. Adrian's head snapped up. Marcus stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 guards. His cousin looked haggard, thinner than he'd been a week ago, with bruises under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. "Come to gloat?" Adrian's voice was hoarse from disuse. "Come to give you information." Marcus stepped into the cell, and the guards closed the door behind him. "We don't have much time, so listen carefully." Adrian straightened, his instincts sharpening despite the exhaustion. "What information?" "Clara's in danger." Marcus pulled out a crumpled paper from inside his coat. "Real danger, not court scandal. Someone tried to kill her last night." The words hit Adrian like a fist to the chest. His vision tunneled, breath catching. "What?" "She was in the palace gardens. Alone. Someone came at her with a knife." Marcus's jaw tightened. She fought back, screamed loud enough to attract guards. They caught the assassin before he could finish the job. "Is she hurt?" "Bruises. A cut on her arm. Nothing fatal." But Adrian, the assassin, talked before they executed him. Marcus leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "He was hired by someone inside the court. Someone who wants Clara dead before she can testify at the formal inquiry." The inquiry. Adrian had almost forgotten. King Leopold had ordered a full public investigation into the conspiracy. Every noble involved would be tried, every secret exposed. And Clara was the star witness, the one person who could connect all the pieces. Who hired him? That's the problem. Marcus ran a hand through his hair. The assassin didn't know. He was paid through intermediaries. But whoever it is has resources, access, and they're desperate enough to kill a woman under the king's protection. Adrian stood, pacing the small cell like a caged wolf. His mind was racing, connecting patterns. Whitfield was in custody. Ashford, Hartwell, Ravencroft, all arrested. But the conspiracy had been too organized, too sophisticated for just those players. There had to be someone else, someone they'd missed. "You think there's another traitor in the court?" "I know there is." Marcus pulled out another document. "I've been going through financial records while you've been rotting in here. And I found something. Payments to Whitfield that don't match any known source. Coded messages that reference someone called the Cardinal." The Cardinal. Adrian felt ice slide down his spine. That was Whitfield's boss. The one coordinating everything. And he's still out there. Marcus's expression was grim. "Which means Clara's a walking target. They'll keep trying until they succeed." Adrian's hands clenched into fists. The rage that flooded through him was clean and cold. He'd destroyed himself trying to protect his legacy, betrayed the woman he loved to save his father's name. And for what? So some faceless traitor could finish what Adrian's cowardice had started? No, not happening. "I need to get out of here," Adrian said flatly. "That's treason. You're awaiting trial." Marcus stepped back. "If you escape, I don't care about the trial." Adrian moved to the cell door, testing the lock. "I don't care about my reputation or what's left of the Blackthorn name. Someone is trying to kill Clara because she told the truth, because she was brave enough to stand up when everyone else was too scared. And I'm going to stop them." "How?" "You're locked in a dungeon. Then you're going to get me out." Adrian turned to face his cousin. "You said you wanted to do one decent thing before you paid for your crimes. This is it. Help me protect Clara. Help me finish what we started." Marcus stared at him for a long moment. Then a slow smile spread across his face. "You're finally thinking clearly." "What?" "For 6 years you've been the Winter Duke. Cold, calculating, always 3 moves ahead." Marcus moved closer. "But that man would never risk everything for someone else. That man would have let Clara die to protect himself. The fact that you're willing to throw away your last chance at redemption to save her, that's the first real thing you've done since your father died." Adrian felt something shift in his chest. Marcus was right. For years he'd been playing a role, wearing a mask, convinced that power meant standing alone. But real strength wasn't isolation. It was knowing what you'd fight for even when you had nothing left to lose. "Can you get me out?" "Maybe." Marcus glanced at the door. "The night guards are sympathetic. They think you got a raw deal. But Adrian, if you do this, there's no coming back. You'll be a fugitive, an outlaw. Even if you save Clara, even if you expose the Cardinal, the Crown will still hunt you." "I know. And you're willing to accept that?" Adrian thought about Clara's face in the throne room, the way she'd defended him even after he tried to destroy her, the tears she'd cried for a man who didn't deserve them, the mercy she'd shown when she could have demanded vengeance. He'd spent 6 years building walls to protect himself from exactly this kind of vulnerability. And in 3 weeks, Clara had torn every wall down and shown him what it meant to actually live instead of just survive. She saved me, Adrian said quietly, when she should have let me burn. The least I can do is return the favor. Marcus nodded slowly. Then we move tonight. There's a shift change at midnight. I've bribed the new guards to look the other way for 10 minutes. That's all the time you'll have to get clear of the palace. And then? Then you find Clara, and you protect her until the inquiry. Marcus's expression hardened. And you figure out who the hell the cardinal is before they kill everyone who knows the truth. Exact. The shift change came at midnight exactly. Adrian heard the guards talking in low voices, the clink of keys, the scrape of boots on stone. Then his cell door swung open and Marcus appeared, dressed in guard's armor that fit poorly. Move now. They ran through darkened corridors, Marcus leading the way through passages Adrian had never known existed. Behind them, shouts echoed as someone discovered the empty cell. But Marcus had planned the route carefully, down, through the kitchens, out through the servants' entrance where nobles never looked. The night air hit Adrian's face like a blessing. He'd forgotten what freedom tasted like. They sprinted across the palace grounds, staying in shadows, moving toward the outer wall where Marcus had arranged horses. "Where is she?" Adrian demanded as they mounted. "Safe house in the old quarter." Marcus kicked his horse into motion. "Lady Pemberton owns it. Former patroness of the arts, hates the current regime. She's hiding Clara until the inquiry. Can we trust her?" "No." Marcus shot him a grim look. "But she hates Duke Ravencroft more than she fears the crown. And right now, enemy of my enemy is the best we've got." They rode hard through empty streets, hooves clattering on cobblestones. Adrian's heart pounded with an intensity that had nothing to do with exertion. Every second Clara was exposed, vulnerable, a target. Every second he wasn't there to protect her felt like a countdown to disaster. The safe house was a narrow townhouse wedged between larger buildings, easy to miss if you didn't know to look. Marcus dismounted, pounding on the door in a specific rhythm. After a long moment, it cracked open. Lady Pemberton's face appeared, sharp-eyed despite the late hour. "You're early. Plans changed." Marcus pushed inside, Adrian right behind him. "Where is she?" "Upstairs. Second door on the left." Lady Pemberton's gaze flicked to Adrian. "She's not going to be happy to see you." "I don't care if she's happy." Adrian took the stairs 3 at a time. "I care if she's alive." He burst through the door without knocking. Clara was sitting by the window, a bandage wrapped around her left forearm, her face pale in the moonlight. She spun at the sound, and her eyes went wide. "Adrian, what are you? How did you—" "I escaped." Adrian crossed the room in 2 strides, his hands hovering over her shoulders, not quite touching. "Are you all right? Marcus said someone attacked you." "I'm fine." Clara pulled away, putting distance between them. Her voice was cold in a way that cut deeper than any blade. "What are you doing here?" "Protecting you." "Someone's trying to kill you, Clara. The cardinal, Whitfield's superior, is still out there, and they won't stop until you're dead. So you broke out of prison." Clara's laugh was bitter. "That's brilliant, Adrian. Now you're a fugitive on top of everything else. How exactly does that help?" "It helps because I'm not letting you die." Adrian heard the desperation in his own voice. "I don't care what it costs me. I don't care if the crown hunts me for the rest of my life. You're not facing this alone." "I am alone." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "You made sure of that when you tried to frame me for treason, when you chose your legacy over the truth, over me." The words were a whip across raw flesh. Adrian absorbed them because he deserved every lash. "You're right. I was a coward. I let fear turn me into exactly the kind of monster I spent years pretending not to be. And I don't expect forgiveness. But Clara, please, let me do this one thing. Let me keep you safe until the inquiry. Why should I trust you? Because I have nothing left to lose." Adrian took a step closer, and this time she didn't retreat. No title, no wealth, no reputation, nothing except the knowledge that I destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me. You don't have to forgive me. You don't even have to look at me. But let me stand between you and whoever wants you dead." Clara stared at him, and Adrian saw the war playing out in her eyes. Logic against emotion. Self-preservation against the stubborn hope that people could change. Finally, she nodded once, sharply. "Fine. Until the inquiry, Then you disappear and I never see you again. Agreed. The word tasted like ash, but Adrian forced it out. A crash from downstairs shattered the moment. Marcus's voice shouted something unintelligible, followed by the unmistakable sound of steel on steel. Adrian grabbed Clara's hand, pulling her away from the window just as an arrow shattered through the glass, embedding itself in the wall where her head had been. They found us. Adrian shoved Clara toward the door. Move! They burst into the hallway as armed men flooded up the stairs. Not palace guards. These wore no uniforms, no identifying marks. Hired killers. Professional and efficient. Adrian grabbed a candlestick from a side table, the only weapon available, and swung it at the first man through. The impact jarred his arm, but the attacker went down hard. This way! Marcus appeared at the end of the hall, his sword red with blood. There's a back exit through the cellar! They ran, Clara between them, as the safe house erupted into chaos. Lady Pemberton was screaming somewhere below. Steel clashed against steel. The smell of smoke began to curl up the stairs. Someone had set a fire. Adrian's mind worked frantically as they descended into the cellar. This wasn't random. Whoever the cardinal was, they had resources. Intelligence. They'd tracked Clara to a location only a handful of people knew about, then sent a kill squad to finish the job. Which meant the traitor was someone with access to the highest levels of court planning. The cellar was dank and low-ceilinged, filled with wine racks and forgotten furniture. Marcus led them to what looked like a solid wall but was actually a hidden door. He wrenched it open, revealing a tunnel that smelled like sewage and rot. This leads to the merchant quarter. Marcus's face was grim. Get Clara out of the city. There's a coaching inn called the Rusty Anchor. The proprietor owes me money. He'll give you horses and supplies. What about you? Adrian demanded. Someone has to slow them down. Marcus grabbed Adrian's shoulder. And someone has to figure out who the cardinal is. I'll go back to the palace. Use my arrest as cover to access restricted files. Find out who's been pulling the strings. They'll kill you. Probably. Marcus smiled, and it was the saddest thing Adrian had ever seen. But I've been dead for 6 years anyway, living with what I helped create. This is the first time I've felt alive since your father roped me into this mess. Let me go out doing something that matters. Adrian pulled his cousin into a fierce embrace. Thank you. For everything. Protect her. Marcus pulled away, already turning back toward the stairs. And Adrian? Be the man she believed you could be, not the one your father wanted you to become. He disappeared into the smoke and chaos. Adrian grabbed Claire's hand, and they plunged into the tunnel. Behind them, the sounds of fighting intensified. Ahead, darkness and the unknown. The tunnel seemed endless. Adrian's breath came in ragged gasps, his legs burning from the sprint. Claire kept pace beside him, her hand tight in his, neither of them speaking. There was nothing to say. Words were for people who had time and safety. They had neither. They emerged in an alley behind a butcher's shop, the night air shockingly cold after the tunnel's oppressive heat. Adrian pulled Clara into the shadows, his eyes scanning for threats. The streets were empty, but that meant nothing. Assassins could be anywhere. We need to split up. Clara's voice was steady despite the fear in her eyes. 2 targets are harder to track than 1. No. Adrian's grip on her hand tightened. That's exactly what they want. Divide and conquer. We stay together. Adrian, be realistic. You're a fugitive. I'm a witness. We're both marked for death. Our only chance is figuring out who the cardinal is and stopping them before the inquiry. Adrian forced himself to think past the adrenaline and fear. Someone with court access. Someone who benefits from keeping the conspiracy hidden. Someone who'd rather burn the kingdom than face justice. The list of suspects was long. Half the nobility had something to hide, but not many had the resources to organize this level of coordinated attack. Adrian's mind raced through names, discarding and reconsidering. Then it hit him. A connection he'd missed. A pattern so obvious he'd looked right past it. The inquiry, Adrian said slowly. Who's presiding over it? Chief Justice Thornberry. Clara's brow furrowed. Why? Because he's the one person who could manipulate the entire process. Adrian felt the pieces clicking into place. Control which evidence gets presented. Decide which witnesses testify. Steer the investigation away from certain names while destroying others. You think Thornberry is the cardinal? I think he's the only one who makes sense. Adrian started moving, pulling Clara with him. Whitfield was the operational leader. But someone had to provide legal cover. Someone who could make inconvenient evidence disappear. Someone with the authority to order executions without oversight. Claire's face went pale. If you're right, the inquiry is a trap. They're going to use it to eliminate everyone who knows the truth, all in one place. Exactly. Which means we have to expose him first, before he can orchestrate a massacre disguised as justice. How? Claire's voice rose slightly. We're fugitives, Adrian. We have no proof, no allies, no way to reach the king without being killed. We have something better. Adrian stopped at the edge of an intersection, peering around the corner. We have nothing left to lose. And that makes us more dangerous than any army. He looked at Clara, really looked at her, and saw his own desperation reflected in her eyes. They were two people who'd lost everything except each other. Two people who'd been broken and betrayed and pushed past every limit. Two people who'd discovered that sometimes the only way out was straight through the fire. What are you thinking? Clara whispered. I'm thinking we stop running. Adrian's voice hardened with resolve. I'm thinking we go to the inquiry tomorrow. Walk right into Thornberry's trap. And we turn it against him in front of the entire kingdom. That's suicide. Maybe. Adrian managed a grim smile. But I've been dead inside for 6 years. At least this way I'll die for something that matters. Clara stared at him. Then, slowly, she nodded. If we're doing this, we do it right. We need evidence. Proof that Thornbury is the cardinal. I know where to find it. Adrian's mind was racing now. Plans forming and discarding and reforming. The Hall of Records. Where all court documents are kept. If Thornberry's been manipulating legal proceedings, there will be a trail. Orders issued. Cases dismissed. Payments authorized. We just have to find it before dawn. The Hall of Records is inside the palace. Clara's voice was flat. The place crawling with guards looking for you. Then we better be convincing. Adrian took her hand again. Are you with me for this last insane gamble? Clara looked at their joined hands, then at his face, then at the dark streets around them where death waited in every shadow. And Adrian saw the moment she made her choice. Not the safe choice, not the smart choice, but the only choice that let her look at herself in the mirror. I'm with you. Her voice was steady as stone, until the end. The Hall of Records sat in the oldest part of the palace, a massive stone building that predated the current dynasty. Adrian and Clara approached it from the east, using service corridors and forgotten passages that Adrian had memorized during his years at court. The guards were doubled tonight, nervous after his escape, but their attention was focused outward. No one expected a fugitive to break back in. How do we get past them? Clara whispered. We don't. Adrian pulled off his ragged shirt, revealing the old scars on his back, marks from his father's discipline that he'd hidden for years. Then he grabbed Clara and pushed her ahead of him, his grip tight enough to bruise. Walk. Now. His voice was harsh, loud enough to carry. Clara caught on immediately. She stumbled forward, crying out in pain that sounded genuine. The guards turned, hands going to their weapons, then froze when they recognized Adrian. Duke Blackthorn? The captain's voice was uncertain. Found the traitor trying to escape through the wine cellars. Adrian's voice was cold authority, every inch the Winter Duke despite his disheveled appearance, taking her to the interrogation rooms per the king's orders. Anyone who stops me will answer to his majesty personally. But sir, you're under arrest, and I'm following royal commands. Adrian's eyes were ice. Are you suggesting the king's authority doesn't supersede your orders? The guards exchanged uncertain looks. Adrian held his breath. This gambit only worked because people still saw him as powerful, still heard Duke in his voice even though he had no title, still responded to 6 years of conditioned fear. The captain stepped aside. Make it quick, your grace. They passed through, Clara still playing the captive, Adrian maintaining the iron grip. Behind them, the guards muttered nervously but didn't follow. The moment they were around the corner, Adrian released her. You're terrifyingly good at that, Clara rubbed her arm. I learned from my father. Adrian's voice was flat. He taught me that power is performance. If you act like you're in charge, people assume you are. It's all theater. They moved deeper into the hall, past rows of shelves holding centuries of legal documents. The air smelled like old paper and dust. Somewhere in this labyrinth was the evidence that would prove Thornberry's guilt. They just had to find it before dawn. What are we looking for? Clara began scanning shelves. Financial authorizations. Adrian pulled down a heavy ledger. Case dismissals. Anything with Thornberry's signature that doesn't match the official court calendar. They worked in silence, the only sound the rustle of paper and their ragged breathing. Minutes ticked past. Adrian's hands shook with exhaustion and adrenaline. They were so close to answers, so close to justice, so close to... Here! Claire's voice cut through the silence. Adrian, look at this. She held up a document with trembling hands. It was a financial authorization signed by Thornberry, dated 3 days before Whitfield's arrest. Payment to a mercenary company called the Iron Crows. The same company, Adrian realized with cold certainty, that had attacked the safe house tonight. That's it. Adrian grabbed the paper. That's the proof we need. Thornberry hired the assassins. He's been covering up the conspiracy while eliminating witnesses. He's the cardinal. There's more. Clara pulled out another file. Look at these case records. Every investigation into noble corruption for the past 6 years. All dismissed or redirected. Always on Thornberry's authority, always with some legal technicality that doesn't quite make sense. Adrian felt rage and triumph warring in his chest. They had him. The evidence was damning. All they had to do was survive until the inquiry and present it publicly where Thornberry couldn't suppress it. A slow clap echoed through the hall. Adrian spun, pulling Clara behind him. Chief Justice Thornberry emerged from between the shelves, flanked by 6 armed men. The old judge's face was calm, almost amused. Remarkable. Thornberry's voice was cultured, refined. I didn't think you'd figure it out, Blackthorn. You were always good at seeing patterns, but I gave you credit for more self-preservation than this. You're under arrest. Adrian's voice was steady despite the fear coursing through him. For conspiracy, murder, and treason against the crown. Am I? Thornberry tilted his head. And who exactly is going to arrest me? You're a fugitive. She's a servant. You have no authority, no allies, and in about 30 seconds you'll have no lives. The armed men raised crossbows, 6 weapons trained on 2 unarmed targets. The math was brutal and simple. Adrian looked at Clara. Her face was pale but determined. They'd come so far, sacrificed so much, and it was going to end here, in a dusty hall of forgotten records, with truth dying in the darkness, unless they refused to let it end. If you kill us, the truth comes out anyway. Adrian kept his voice level. Marcus knows. Lady Pemberton knows. You can't silence everyone, can't I? Thornberry smiled. Marcus Blackthorn died an hour ago, killed resisting arrest after helping you escape. Lady Pemberton's house burned to the ground with everyone inside, and when I find the documents you're holding, they'll conveniently be destroyed in the same fire that claims this hall. No. The word escaped Clara like a sob. Yes. Thornberry's eyes were cold. This is how power really works, Miss Whitmore. Not through justice or truth or any of the noble principles you've been clinging to. Power belongs to those willing to do whatever it takes, to burn everything down rather than face consequences. Adrian felt Clara's hand slip into his. He squeezed it, trying to communicate everything he'd never said. Apology. Gratitude. Love. In seconds they'd be dead, but at least they'd be together. Then a voice rang out from the entrance. Stand down! All of you! Now! King Leopold strode into the hall, surrounded by royal guards. Behind him came Duke Ravencroft, Duchess Hartwell, Lord Ashford, all the conspirators who should have been in cells, all wearing the expressions of people who'd made a deal. Adrian's mind reeled. This was wrong. This was... Your Majesty. Thornberry's smile never wavered. What excellent timing. I've just apprehended the fugitive Duke of Blackthorn and his accomplice. They were attempting to destroy evidence. That's not true. Clara's voice cut through. We found proof that Thornberry is the cardinal, that he's been orchestrating everything. Lies from a desperate girl. Thornberry gestured dismissively. Your Majesty, surely you see... I see quite a lot, actually. King Leopold's voice was granite, including the documents my men found in your private chambers an hour ago. The ones detailing your role as coordinator of the entire conspiracy. The ones that prove you've been manipulating my court for 6 years. Thornberry's face went white. Those are forgeries, clearly planted by me. Duke Ravencroft stepped forward, and Adrian saw something he'd never expected in the old Duke's eyes. Shame, genuine remorse. I testified against you, Thornberry, told the king everything, how you recruited us, how you threatened our families, how you made us complicit in treason to save ourselves. You fool. Thornbury spun on Ravencroft. Do you think confessing will save you? You're all going to hang. Perhaps. Duchess Hartwell's voice was quiet. But we'll hang for what we actually did, not for your crimes. She looked at Clara. We're sorry, Miss Whitmore, for the gossip, the cruelty, all of it. You were right to expose us. We were just too cowardly to face it. Adrian stared at the assembled nobles, these people who'd tried to destroy them, now standing as unlikely allies. It made no sense, unless… Marcus? Adrian looked at the king. He got to them, didn't he? Before he died? He's not dead. King Leopold's expression softened slightly. Your cousin survived his arrest. Barely. And he used his testimony to broker a deal. The conspirators turn on Thornbury and testify at the inquiry, and in exchange their sentences are reduced to exile instead of execution. And you believed them? I verified independently. The king's gaze shifted to Thornbury. Every document, every testimony, all of it points to you, Chief Justice. You're the cardinal, and tomorrow, in front of the entire kingdom, you'll face the consequences. Thornbury's mask finally cracked, his face twisted with rage and desperation. You think this ends anything? You think exposing me fixes the rot? This kingdom is corrupt to its core. I was just the one honest enough to profit from it. Perhaps. King Leopold gestured to his guards. Take him, and prepare the Grand Hall for tomorrow's inquiry. It's time the kingdom saw what happens when power corrupts absolutely. The guards moved forward. Thornbury backed away, and Adrian saw the calculation in his eyes. The desperate weighing of terrible options. Then the Chief Justice grabbed a dagger from the nearest guard's belt and lunged. Not at the king, not at his captors, at Clara. Because killing the star witness was his last chance. His final play to throw the inquiry into chaos and maybe, possibly, escape in the confusion. Adrian saw it happening in crystallized slow motion, Thornbury's blade flashing in torchlight, Clara's eyes going wide, the distance between them, 10 feet, impossible to cross in time, the guards too far away, the king shouting, everything converging on this single moment where everything would be decided, and Adrian did the only thing he could. He threw himself between the blade and Clara. The impact knocked him backward. White-hot pain exploded across his chest as steel bit deep. He heard Clara screaming, felt strong hands catching him, saw Thornbury being swarmed by guards, finally, too late. Adrian collapsed in Clara's arms, her face hovering above his, tears streaming down her cheeks. He tried to speak, but blood filled his mouth. The hall was spinning. Voices shouted orders he couldn't process. Stay with me. Clara's voice cut through the chaos. Adrian, stay with me. Please. He wanted to. God, he wanted to. But the darkness was closing in, soft and seductive. And his last thought before the world went black was that at least he'd done one thing right. At least he'd saved her. Adrian woke to the smell of lavender and clean linen. For a moment he thought he was dead, that this was whatever came after, peaceful and soft and nothing like he deserved. Then pain screamed through his chest, and he knew with brutal certainty that he was still alive. His eyes opened to a ceiling he didn't recognize. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, warm and golden. He tried to move, and agony lanced through his torso, forcing a gasp from his lips. Don't! A hand pressed gently against his shoulder. You'll tear the stitches. Adrian turned his head, every movement an exercise in controlled suffering. Clara sat beside the bed, her face drawn with exhaustion, but her eyes clear. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, like she'd been sitting vigil over a man who'd tried to destroy her and then thrown himself on a blade to save her life. How long? His voice came out as a rasp, throat raw from disuse. 4 days. Clara reached for a cup of water, helping him drink with a tenderness that made his chest ache worse than the wound. The physician said you were lucky. Another inch to the left and Thornbury's blade would have hit your heart. Maybe that would have been better. Adrian's laugh turned into a cough that sent fresh pain radiating through his body. At least then I wouldn't have to live with what I've done. Clara's expression hardened. Don't you dare play martyr now. You're alive, Adrian. That means you have to deal with the consequences instead of taking the coward's way out through death or self-pity. The words were brutal and exactly what he needed to hear. Adrian closed his eyes, letting the truth settle over him. He was alive. Clara was alive. And somewhere out there, a kingdom waited to learn what justice actually looked like when it wasn't corrupted by fear and ambition. Thornbury? In the dungeons. Awaiting trial. Clara's voice was flat. The inquiry happened 2 days ago, without you there to testify. Adrian felt his stomach drop. The inquiry was supposed to be his chance to make things right, to stand before the kingdom and tell the truth no matter what it cost, and he'd missed it because he was unconscious in a bed, paying for heroism with consciousness. What happened? I testified. Clara's hands twisted in her lap. Told them everything. How we uncovered the conspiracy. How your father was involved. How you tried to protect his legacy by framing me, then came to your senses and helped expose the real traitor. Every ugly truth we'd been trying to hide. And they listened. Clara looked up, and Adrian saw tears gathering in her gray eyes. Duke Ravenscroft testified. Duchess Hartwell. Lord Ashford. Even Marcus from his sickbed. They all corroborated the story, showed how Thornbury had been manipulating everyone, how he'd threatened families and destroyed lives to maintain control. Adrian felt something tight in his chest begin to loosen. The truth was out, all of it. The conspiracy exposed in the harsh light of public scrutiny. No more secrets, no more lies. Just the brutal reality of what corruption looked like when you stopped pretending it was acceptable. What was the verdict? Thornbury hangs tomorrow at dawn. Clara's voice was quiet. Ravenscroft, Hartwell, and Ashford are exiled for life. Their estates seized, their titles revoked. They'll live out their days in foreign lands, stripped of everything they valued. And me? Clara was silent for a long moment. King Leopold is still deciding. You exposed the conspiracy, but you also tried to obstruct justice. You escaped custody. You broke a dozen laws trying to protect me. The nobles are divided. Some say you're a hero. Others call you a criminal. She met his eyes. The king asked me what I thought your sentence should be. Adrian's heart pounded despite the pain. What did you say? That you should live. Clara's voice broke. That you should live and carry the weight of what you've done. That death would be mercy you haven't earned yet. That real redemption only comes from facing every day knowing you destroyed yourself trying to be something you weren't, and then building something new from the ruins. That's cruel. Yes. A ghost of a smile touched Clara's lips. I learned from the best. The door opened before Adrian could respond. King Leopold entered, his presence filling the room despite his modest height. The monarch looked older than Adrian remembered, carved by the weight of betrayal and the burden of judgment. Your Grace, the king's voice was neutral. Or should I simply call you Adrian now, since your title is in question? Adrian tried to sit up, failed, settled for turning his head. Your Majesty, whatever you decide, I'll accept it. Will you? Leopold moved to the window, looking out over the palace grounds. Because from what I understand, you've spent most of your life not accepting things. Fighting, controlling, manipulating, building walls so high nobody could see the scared boy underneath. The observation was too accurate to deny. Adrian had spent 6 years constructing an identity designed to protect him from exactly this kind of vulnerability. And in 3 weeks, Clara had demolished every defense and shown him that the scared boy had been running the whole time. I won't fight your judgment, Adrian said finally. I'm done running, done pretending I'm stronger than I am. If you want to execute me for my crimes, I won't resist. Oh, I'm not going to execute you. Leopold turned from the window, and there was something almost amused in his expression. That would be far too easy. No, I'm going to do something much worse. Adrian braced himself for whatever punishment the king had devised. Torture, life imprisonment, public humiliation. He'd earned all of it and more. I'm going to give you a chance to prove you've changed. Leopold sat in the chair on the other side of the bed. Your title is revoked. The Blackthorn estates are seized. Everything you inherited from your father's crimes is forfeit to the crown. You're stripped of nobility, Adrian, as common as the servant girl you fell in love with. Clara made a small sound of protest, but the king raised a hand. However, Leopold's gaze was sharp. You exposed a conspiracy that would have destroyed this kingdom. You protected my witness at great personal cost, and you threw yourself on a blade meant for her. Those actions deserve acknowledgement. So he leaned back, studying Adrian like a puzzle to be solved. Here's my judgment. You're banished from court for 5 years. During that time, you'll work to repay the treasury everything your father stole. Every coin. Clara will oversee the accounting, since she's proven herself more trustworthy than most of my advisors. Adrian's mind reeled. This was worse than execution. This was being forced to live with his shame while rebuilding from nothing. This was 5 years of hard labor and harder truths. This was exactly what Clara had recommended. After 5 years, Leopold continued, if you've fulfilled your debt, and if Clara testifies that you've proven yourself worthy, I'll consider restoring a portion of your holdings. Not the duchy, that's gone forever, but enough land to rebuild. To start over as something other than the Winter Duke. The king stood, moving toward the door. You wanted power, Adrian. You got it, and it ate you alive from the inside. Now you get to learn what it means to build something without the advantage of fear and wealth, to earn respect instead of demanding it, to be loved instead of commanding it. He paused at the threshold. 5 years. Prove you're more than your father's legacy, or don't. Either way, you'll know who you really are when nobody's afraid of you anymore. Leopold left. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken questions. Adrian stared at the ceiling, trying to process what had just happened. He was free. Sort of. Alive. Definitely. And bound to Clara in a way that would force them to confront their shared damage every single day for years. It was a sentence designed by someone who understood that living with your choices was harder than dying for them. Say something. Clara's voice was small. Tell me what you're thinking. Adrian turned his head to look at her. Really look at her. The woman who'd stood in front of a furious lord to protect a child. Who'd risked everything to expose corruption. Who'd defended him even after he tried to frame her. Who'd sat beside his bed for 4 days while he hovered between life and death. The woman he loved with an intensity that terrified him. I'm thinking that 5 years isn't enough time to make up for what I did to you. That a lifetime wouldn't be enough. But I'm thinking I want to try anyway. Clara's eyes filled with tears. I'm not asking for perfection, Adrian. I'm asking for honesty, for effort. For you to stop running from yourself long enough to figure out who you are without the title and the fear and the walls. I don't know who that is. Adrian's voice cracked. I've been the Duke for so long. Been cold and calculating and alone. I don't know how to be anything else. Then we'll figure it out together. Clara took his hand, her fingers warm against his. I don't forgive you yet. I might not forgive you for years, but I'm willing to stand beside you while you do the work. While you learn what it means to be human instead of a symbol. Adrian squeezed her hand, tears sliding down his temples. Why? After everything I did, why would you do that? Because I saw who you could be before you buried him under duty and fear. Clara's smile was sad and hopeful and heartbreaking. And I think that person is worth saving, even if he doesn't believe it yet. Oh, the inquiry's aftermath rippled through the kingdom like an earthquake. Within a week, half the noble families in the capital were scrambling to prove they hadn't been involved. Ancient alliances crumbled. New ones formed. The social order that had seemed eternal revealed itself as fragile as gossamer. Adrian watched it all from the small cottage at the edge of the city where Clara had insisted they live. No servants, no luxury, just 2 rooms and a garden that needed tending and a life that required building from scratch. It was the hardest thing he'd ever done. His body healed slowly. The wound Thornberry had inflicted left a scar that ran from collarbone to sternum, a permanent reminder of the price of redemption. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the work of rebuilding himself from the inside out. Marcus visited when he was strong enough to travel, his own injuries making him move like an old man despite being barely 30. They sat in the garden on a cool autumn afternoon, 2 former nobles stripped of everything except their shared guilt. I testified at your trial. Marcus's voice was rough. Told them you saved my life when you could have left me to die in that safe house fire. You testified at mine too. Adrian studied his cousin's face, seeing new lines etched by suffering. We're even. We'll never be even. Marcus laughed bitterly. I helped perpetuate treason for 6 years, stood by while your father corrupted himself and everyone around him. I'm as guilty as any of them, but you chose to stop. Adrian's voice was quiet. That has to count for something. Does it? Marcus met his eyes. Or is that just what we tell ourselves so we can sleep at night? Adrian didn't have an answer. Redemption wasn't a clean transaction where good deeds canceled out bad ones. It was messier than that. Harder. It was waking up every morning knowing what you'd done and choosing to be better anyway. Choosing it over and over until maybe, someday, the choosing became natural instead of an act of will. The king gave me the same deal he gave you. Marcus pulled out a document. 5 years of labor, repaying what I helped steal, proving I'm more than my worst choices. Will you do it? I don't know. Marcus folded the paper carefully. Part of me wants to run, disappear into some foreign country where nobody knows my name, start over completely. But that's still running, isn't it? Marcus's smile was self-deprecating. And I'm tired of being a coward, even if facing this destroys me. Adrian understood. Sometimes the bravest thing you could do was stand still and let justice find you. Let consequences catch up. Let the weight of your choices press down until you learn to carry it or broke trying. They sat in silence as the sun began to set, two men who'd lost everything trying to figure out what came next. Clara found Adrian in the garden 2 hours later, staring at nothing. She'd been at the market, her arms full of vegetables and bread, her dress simple and practical. She looked more beautiful than any noblewoman in silk. You're brooding again. She set down her basket. I can tell because you get this line between your eyebrows when you're overthinking. I'm not brooding. Adrian looked up at her. I'm contemplating. That's just brooding with better vocabulary. Clara sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. What are you contemplating? Whether I can actually do this. Adrian gestured vaguely at the cottage, the garden, the life they were trying to build. Whether 5 years is enough time to become someone worthy of you. You're asking the wrong question. Clara's voice was gentle. It's not about being worthy of me. It's about being worthy of yourself. About looking in a mirror and recognizing the person looking back. I don't know if I'll ever recognize him. Adrian turned to face her. The Duke is dead. But I don't know who Adrian is without that armor, without the fear keeping everyone at a distance. Then we find out. Clara took his hand, lacing their fingers together. Day by day, choice by choice, we build something new from what's left. Adrian looked at their joined hands, at the calluses forming on his palms from actual labor, at the dirt under his fingernails from tending the garden. 6 weeks ago, he'd commanded servants with a word. Now he was learning to grow his own food. The reversal should have been humiliating. Instead, it felt like freedom. Tell me something true. His voice was rough. Something you've never said before. Clara was quiet for a long moment. When I testified at the inquiry, they asked me if I loved you. She met his eyes. I said no, because admitting it felt like betraying myself, like accepting that I'd fallen for someone who hurt me deeply. Adrian's chest tightened. I understand. But it was a lie. Clara's voice cracked. I do love you, even after everything, even knowing you tried to destroy me. I love the man who protected a servant boy, who exposed corruption despite the cost, who threw himself on a blade without thinking. She wiped at her eyes. I hate that I love you, but I can't seem to stop. Adrian pulled her close, ignoring the pain in his chest. I don't deserve this. Don't deserve you choosing to love me anyway. Probably not. Clara's laugh was watery. But love isn't about deserving, it's about choosing. And I'm choosing you. Not the Duke, not the legacy, just you. Flawed and damaged and trying to be better. Adrian pressed his face into her hair, breathing in the scent of market soap and sunshine. This was intimacy he'd never allowed himself. Vulnerability without calculation. Connection without control. It was terrifying and exhilarating and more real than anything he'd experienced in 6 years of power. I'm going to fail. His voice was muffled against her shoulder. I'm going to make mistakes. Hurt you again without meaning to. Disappoint you. I know. Clara pulled back enough to look at him. And when you do, I'll tell you. We'll fight. We'll work through it. That's what real love is, Adrian. Not the fairy tale. The messy, difficult work of choosing each other even when it's hard. Adrian kissed her then, soft and tentative, asking permission with every movement. Clara kissed him back, her hands coming up to frame his face, and for a moment the world narrowed to just this. Just them. Just the possibility that maybe, impossibly, they could build something good from the wreckage. When they pulled apart, the sun had set completely. Stars emerged overhead, cold and distant and beautiful. Adrian thought about the Winter Duke who'd looked at those same stars and felt nothing, who'd armored himself so thoroughly that beauty couldn't touch him. That man was gone, and Adrian was surprised to find he didn't mourn him. Diasique. Thornberry hanged at dawn on a gray morning that tasted like rain. Adrian didn't attend the execution. Neither did Clara. They heard about it secondhand from Marcus, who'd watched with the grim satisfaction of a man seeing justice finally delivered. He didn't beg. Marcus's voice was flat, didn't cry or plead, just stood there and accepted it. I don't know if that makes him brave or just empty. Maybe both. Adrian poured tea with hands that only shook slightly. Maybe he'd been hollow for so long he didn't know how to feel anymore. Is that what would have happened to you? Marcus asked quietly. If Clara hadn't stopped you, would you have become that empty? Adrian thought about the man he'd been in those terrible days after discovering his father's treason. The cold calculation. The willingness to sacrifice innocence to preserve legacy. The absolute certainty that survival meant standing alone. Yes, the admission tasted like ash. I would have become exactly that. A shell going through the motions of power without remembering why power mattered in the first place. Marcus nodded slowly. Then she saved more than your life. She saved your soul. Adrian wanted to dismiss it as melodrama, but he couldn't. Clara had seen him at his worst and refused to let him disappear into that darkness. Had held up a mirror and forced him to see what he was becoming. Had offered him a path back to humanity, even when he didn't deserve it. That was the real gift. Not forgiveness, not love, but the chance to be better than his worst moment. The work of repayment began in earnest that winter. Adrian took employment at a merchant house, using his financial knowledge to audit accounts and track shipments. It was honest labor, well paid, and completely mundane. No one bowed when he entered. No one feared his displeasure. He was simply Adrian, a man with a head for numbers and a past nobody talked about. At first, the anonymity was suffocating. He'd spent 6 years being recognized everywhere he went, commanding attention with his presence alone. Now he was invisible. Just another clerk in a city full of them. But slowly, imperceptibly, the invisibility became liberating. He could make mistakes without them becoming scandals, could have conversations without calculating every word, could fail without it reflecting on his family name because he had no family name anymore. He was just himself. And that self, he was discovering, wasn't nearly as terrible as he'd feared. Clara worked alongside him in her own way, managing the books that tracked their repayment to the crown. She was meticulous, unforgiving in her accuracy, refusing to let him pretend they'd paid back more than they had. Every coin counted, every debt acknowledged. They fought sometimes, sharp arguments that revealed old wounds and new frustrations, Adrian's tendency to control, Clara's inability to trust fully, the scar tissue from his betrayal that hadn't finished healing. But they fought honestly, without games or manipulation, and afterward they talked, worked through it, learned each other's damage and how to navigate around the sharp edges. It wasn't the romance ballads sang about. It was harder, messier, more real. And Adrian found himself grateful for every difficult conversation because it meant they were building something genuine instead of performing something beautiful. What? Spring arrived with unexpected gentleness. The garden Adrian had planted began to bloom, tiny shoots of green pushing through soil that had been barren weeks before. He knelt in the dirt, coaxing life from earth, and thought about metaphors he was too tired to fully articulate. Clara found him there, her hands dusty from the mill where she'd been negotiating grain prices. She knelt beside him, examining the emerging plants with satisfaction. Tomatoes? And beans. Maybe some squash if I didn't kill them with my incompetence. Adrian sat back on his heels. Who knew growing food was this difficult? People who've been doing it their whole lives. Clara's tone was dry. Welcome to the experience of 90% of the kingdom, Your Grace. Just Adrian. He caught her hand. No more titles. I don't want to be Your Grace ever again. Clara studied him for a long moment. Good, because I never liked the Duke much anyway. But Adrian? She smiled. Adrian, I could learn to love completely. Could learn? I thought you already... I do. Clara's expression turned serious. But there are levels to love, Adrian. There's the desperate, consuming kind that burns hot and fast. And then there's the steady kind. The kind that builds slowly over years of choosing each other, of doing the work. That's the kind I want with you. Adrian felt something settle in his chest, a peace he hadn't known he was searching for. She was right. The love that had ignited between them had been wild and destructive, fueled by danger and desperation. But this slow building of trust and partnership and genuine affection, this was stronger than any passion. This could last. Then let's build it. Adrian pulled her close, dirt and all, slowly, honestly, for as long as it takes. Clara kissed him, soft and sweet, and Adrian tasted possibility in it. The possibility that damaged people could heal, that mistakes didn't have to define you forever, that redemption was a journey, not a destination, and sometimes the journey was enough. Ichasik. The 5-year mark arrived on a morning that felt like any other. Adrian woke in the cottage that had become home, Clara warm beside him, sunlight streaming through windows that needed washing. He lay still, taking inventory of his life. The debt to the crown was paid, every stolen coin accounted for and returned. It had taken brutal discipline and sacrifice, but they'd done it, together. His body still carried scars, the chest wound from Thornberry's blade, various injuries from 5 years of actual labor. But he was stronger than he'd been as Duke, harder in some ways, softer in others. And Clara, she was everything, partner, conscience, the one person who'd seen him at his absolute worst and chosen to stay anyway. They'd fought and healed and built something so far removed from the fairy tale romance he'd once scorned that it barely resembled love as the nobility understood it. But it was love, the real kind, the kind that endured. You're thinking too loud. Claire's voice was sleep rough. I can hear your thoughts from here. Adrian smiled against her hair. Just taking stock. 5 years. We made it. Did you doubt we would? Yes. The honesty came easier now. Every day for the first year, every week the second. By the 3rd year, only occasionally. Now? He turned to face her. Now I'm just grateful. Clara's eyes opened, gray and clear and full of affection that still took his breath away. The king wants to see us today. Something about your sentence being complete. Adrian had almost forgotten. The possibility of partial restoration, land, a minor title, a chance to rebuild the Blackthorn name as something other than a cautionary tale. Except he found he didn't care much about any of that anymore. What do you want? He asked Clara. If Leopold offers me back some of what I lost, what do you want me to say? Clara was quiet for a long moment. I want you to be honest. If you want to return to nobility, to try rebuilding, I'll support you. But if you've found peace in this life, in being ordinary, then choose that. And you? What do you want? I want you happy. Clara's smile was soft. Duke or commoner, rich or poor, I just want you whole. Want us whole. Adrian kissed her, long and deep, trying to communicate what words couldn't quite capture. Then he climbed out of bed, moving through morning routines that had become comfortable. Washing, dressing in simple clothes, making breakfast together in their tiny kitchen. This was his life now, unglamorous, unheroic, just the steady work of living honestly and loving deeply, and he wouldn't trade it for any duchy in the kingdom. King Leopold received them in a private audience chamber, informal and surprisingly warm. The monarch looked older, his hair more gray than Adrian remembered, but his eyes were still sharp. You've completed your sentence. Leopold gestured for them to sit. 5 years, full repayment, and from what my observers tell me, you've been genuinely reformed. No schemes, no manipulation, just honest work. I learned my lesson, Your Majesty. Adrian kept his voice level. Power without conscience destroys everything it touches, including the person wielding it. A hard lesson. The king studied him. One your father never learned. He paused. I've decided to restore some of your holdings. Not the duchy. That's permanently dissolved. But there's an estate in the north, small but profitable, and a minor lordship that comes with it, enough to rebuild, to give your children a future. Adrian felt Clara's hand slip into his. Children. They'd talked about that possibility in abstract terms, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real, made the future feel tangible instead of theoretical. But there's a condition. Leopold's expression turned serious. The estate comes with responsibility for the northern villages. 300 families who need leadership, investment, someone who understands that power is service, not dominion. He leaned forward. Can you be that, Adrian? Can you lead without becoming the Winter Duke again? The question hung in the air. Adrian thought about the man he'd been 6 years ago, cold, isolated, convinced that strength meant standing alone. That man would have taken the offer and immediately begun calculating how to leverage it into greater power. But Adrian wasn't that man anymore. He'd been broken down and rebuilt from materials that couldn't be corrupted by ambition. He'd learned that real strength was admitting weakness, that true power came from connection, not control. I can try. Adrian's voice was steady. I can't promise I won't make mistakes. Can't promise I'll always get it right. But I can promise to listen to the people I serve, to value their lives as much as I value my own, to remember that leadership is earned every day through action, not inherited through blood. Leopold smiled. That's all I'm asking. He pulled out documents. The estate is yours. Use it well. Build something worth leaving to those theoretical children. Adrian took the papers with shaking hands. This was more than he'd hoped for, more than he deserved. A genuine second chance to do things right. There's one more thing. The king looked at Clara. You've proven yourself uncommonly capable these 5 years. Sharp mind, honest character. I'd like to offer you a position as royal auditor, overseeing treasury accounting, making sure what happened with Thornbury never happens again. Clara's eyes went wide. Your Majesty, I'm honored, but you're qualified. Leopold's tone left no room for argument. More qualified than half the nobles I've got managing finances. And you're not beholden to family interests or political games. You tell the truth no matter who it hurts. That's exactly what I need. Clara looked at Adrian, and he saw the question in her eyes. This would mean staying in the capital, maintaining the cottage, living apart from the northern estate part of the year. It would complicate their life together. Take it. Adrian squeezed her hand. You've earned this 100 times over, and we'll make it work. Clara turned back to the king, her spine straightening with decision. I accept. On one condition. Name it. I want full authority to investigate any financial irregularity I find, no matter who's involved. No interference from nobles trying to protect their interests. Leopold laughed. Granted. They'll be warned. You'll make enemies. I've survived worse. Clara's smile was sharp. I can handle a few angry lords. They left the palace in a daze, documents clutched in their hands, their future rewritten in the space of an hour. Adrian felt overwhelmed by the weight of possibility. An estate, responsibility, the chance to build something good, and fear. What if he failed? What if he became the Winter Duke again, corrupted by the smallest taste of power? You're overthinking again. Clara bumped his shoulder. I can see it happening. How do you always know? Because I know you. Clara stopped walking, turning to face him fully. Know when you're spiraling into doubt. Know when you need someone to pull you back. She took both his hands. Listen to me, Adrian. You're not your father. You're not the Duke you used to be. You're a man who spent 5 years proving he could change. Trust that. What if I forget? What if the power goes to my head? Then I'll remind you. Clara's voice was steel wrapped in silk. I'll be your conscience when yours fails. Your mirror when you can't see clearly. That's what we do for each other. We keep each other honest. Adrian pulled her into an embrace, burying his face in her hair. This was what he'd been missing for 6 years. Someone who'd challenge him, ground him, love him enough to call him on his worst impulses. Marry me. The words escaped before he'd consciously decided to say them. Clara went still in his arms. What? Marry me. Adrian pulled back enough to see her face. Not because society expects it, not because it's politically convenient, but because I want to spend the rest of my life choosing you, building with you, being the best version of myself with you as witness and partner, and the woman I love more than ambition or power or legacy. Tears streamed down Clara's cheeks. That was possibly the worst proposal I've ever heard. Too long, too wordy. Very you. Is that a yes? Of course it's a yes, you impossible man. Clara laughed through tears. Though I have conditions. Name them. We do this as equals, no lord and servant dynamic, no one bowing or scraping. We're partners in everything or we're partners in nothing. Agreed. Adrian felt joy rising in his chest like dawn. What else? You teach our children about your mistakes. Don't hide the ugliness. Don't pretend you were always good. They need to know that people can fail terribly and still choose to be better. I can do that. Adrian's throat was tight. Anything else? Promise me that if you ever feel yourself slipping, if you start calculating and manipulating and building walls, promise you'll tell me. Let me help before it goes too far. I promise. Adrian cupped her face in his hands. I'll spend the rest of my life keeping that promise. They kissed there in the street, uncaring who saw or what anyone thought. A former duke and a servant. Two broken people who'd found each other in the worst circumstances and somehow, impossibly, built something beautiful from the wreckage. The wedding was small. Marcus stood as Adrian's witness, still bearing scars from his own 5 years of labor, but standing straighter than he had in a decade. Lady Pemberton attended, recovered from the fire and fierce in her support. The king sent a gift, a set of financial ledgers with a note saying good luck keeping him honest. And when Clara walked toward Adrian in a simple dress that cost less than the flowers at his mother's funeral, he thought he'd never seen anything more beautiful. No jewels, no elaborate ceremony, just two people promising to choose each other, every day, for as long as they both lived. The vows were traditional, but Adrian heard the weight behind each word. For better or worse, richer or poorer, in sickness and health. He'd experienced every extreme, had been the richest man in the kingdom and the poorest, had nearly died and clawed his way back to life. And through it all, Clara had been there, witnessing, challenging, loving him anyway. When they were pronounced married, Adrian kissed his wife with the reverence of a man who knew exactly how close he'd come to losing everything that mattered. They moved to the northern estate in late summer. The manor house was modest by ducal standards, 20 rooms instead of 200, but it felt like a palace after 5 years in a cottage. Adrian walked through it with Clara, already planning improvements. A school for village children, better roads, investment in the mill and the smithy. This was power reimagined. Not domination, but stewardship. Not control, but service. He would lead these people by earning their respect, not demanding their fear. The villagers were wary at first. They'd heard stories about the Winter Duke, the cold lord who'd fallen from grace. But Adrian showed up to community meetings and listened more than he spoke. He worked alongside farmers during harvest. He paid fair wages and settled disputes with justice instead of favoritism. Slowly, suspicion turned to cautious acceptance. Acceptance turned to respect. And respect, Adrian learned, was so much more satisfying than fear had ever been. Clara traveled between the estate and the capital, splitting her time between their home and her work as royal auditor. She uncovered embezzlement schemes and corrected accounting errors, and generally terrified corrupt nobles who thought her common birth made her easy to manipulate. She was magnificent, fierce, and uncompromising, and everything Adrian loved about her. And when she came home, they'd sit in the garden they'd planted together and talk about their days, about villagers with grievances and nobles with schemes, about the ordinary struggles of building a life, about the extraordinary gift of having someone to build it with. Their first child was born on a winter morning 3 years after the wedding, a daughter with Clara's gray eyes and Adrian's dark hair. They named her Helena, after no one in particular, because she deserved to be her own person, unbound by legacy or expectation. Adrian held her for the first time with trembling hands, this tiny life that was somehow his responsibility to protect and guide. He thought about his own father, the cold man who'd valued power over love, who'd taught Adrian that emotions were weakness and connection was liability. And he made a silent vow to be different, to be better, to teach Helena that strength came from vulnerability, that power without compassion was poison, that the bravest thing you could do was admit when you were wrong and work to be better. Clara watched him from the bed, exhausted but smiling. "You're going to be a good father, how do you know? Because you're terrified of failing." Clara's voice was soft. The best parents are the ones who understand how much responsibility they're carrying, who take it seriously. Adrian looked down at Helena's sleeping face. "I don't want to mess her up the way my father messed me up." "You won't." Clara reached for his hand. "Because you've done the work, faced your demons, learned from your mistakes. And because when you do fail, and you will, we both will, you'll own it and apologize and teach her that imperfection is human." Adrian sat on the edge of the bed, Helena still cradled in his arms, and felt the last piece of his old self fall away. The Winter Duke was truly dead. In his place was just a man, flawed and trying and deeply, impossibly grateful for the second chance he'd been given. Years passed. A son was born, then another daughter. The northern estate prospered under Adrian's careful stewardship. Clara's audits uncovered 3 more conspiracies before they could fully form, earning her the nickname the Crown's Bloodhound, a title she wore with pride. Marcus eventually married a merchant's daughter and settled in a coastal town, running a shipping business with unexpected competence. He visited twice a year, and each time Adrian saw more peace in his cousin's eyes, more acceptance of the past and commitment to the present. King Leopold died in his sleep at 72, succeeded by a son who'd learned from his father's mistakes. The new king kept Clara on as chief auditor and elevated Adrian to royal advisor on northern affairs, not because of his bloodline, but because of his demonstrated competence and integrity. The former conspirators faded into obscurity. Ravencroft died in exile. Hartwell lived to 90, bitter until the end. Ashford wrote a memoir confessing everything, hoping for posthumous redemption he'd never sought while alive. And Adrian? He grew older, his hair silvered, lines carved themselves around his eyes, smile lines now, not stress. He woke each morning beside the woman who'd saved him from himself and felt gratitude so profound it was almost prayer. He taught his children about his failures, told them the whole ugly story of how he'd tried to frame an innocent woman to protect a legacy built on corruption, showed them that monsters weren't always obvious. Sometimes they wore the faces of fathers and rulers. Sometimes they hid behind noble intentions and justified evil in the name of preservation. But he also taught them that redemption was possible, that the man who'd committed those sins could change, could be better, that past mistakes didn't have to define your future if you were willing to do the brutal work of transformation. Helena grew into a young woman with her mother's sharp mind and her father's strategic thinking. She became a lawyer, defending the defenseless, carrying forward the lessons of justice her parents had learned so painfully. The boys grew too, different paths, different dreams, but all of them rooted in the understanding that power was responsibility, that leadership was service, that the measure of a person wasn't their worst moment, but their willingness to grow beyond it. Adrian was 53 when he stood in the garden one spring evening, watching sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Clara found him there, her hair more silver than dark now, but her eyes still sharp and clear. Brooding again? Reflecting. Adrian pulled her close. There's a difference. If you say so. Clara leaned into him, fitting perfectly against his side. What are you reflecting on? Everything. Adrian gestured vaguely at the estate, the village beyond, the life they'd built. 23 years ago I was the Winter Duke, feared and hated and utterly alone. I thought power was everything, thought isolation was strength. And now? Now I know better. Adrian turned to face her fully. Real power is this, standing here with you, raising children who know how to be good humans, leading a community that actually wants my leadership. He touched her face gently. Real strength is being vulnerable enough to love and be loved. Smiled, the expression lighting up her face in ways that still made his heart stutter. You've come a long way, Adrian Blackthorne. We've come a long way, Adrian corrected. I couldn't have done any of it without you. Without your refusal to let me destroy myself. Without your willingness to see past the monster to the man underneath. You were never a monster. Claire's voice was firm. You were a scared, damaged person who made terrible choices. But you owned them, changed, became someone worthy of the second chance you were given. Adrian pulled her into a kiss that tasted like sunset and possibility. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. I love you. 3 words he'd said thousands of times, but still felt inadequate. I love you more than I knew it was possible to love someone. Thank you for saving my life. Thank you for building a life worth saving. Clara's eyes were bright with tears. Thank you for proving that people can change, that redemption is real, that love is stronger than fear. They stood there as darkness fell. 2 people who'd been broken and rebuilt, bound together by choice and commitment, and the hard-won knowledge that the best things in life required the most work. In the village below, lights began to glow in windows. Families gathering for evening meals, children laughing. The ordinary magic of people living and loving and choosing hope over despair. Adrian had spent 6 years as the Winter Duke, cold and powerful and absolutely alone. And he'd spent 23 years as simply Adrian, building something far more valuable than any empire. A life of meaning, a love that endured, a legacy worth leaving. And standing there in the garden, with Clara's hand in his and stars emerging overhead, Adrian finally understood what his father had never learned. That the greatest power wasn't commanding kingdoms or amassing wealth or inspiring fear. The greatest power was standing beside someone you loved and choosing them, every single day, for the rest of your life. That was the victory no corruption could steal, the triumph no conspiracy could undermine, The legacy that would outlast every title and every fortune. Love. Honest, hard, real. The kind that required work and sacrifice and brutal honesty. The kind worth dying for. The kind worth living for. The kind that had saved him from the winner in his own heart and taught him what it meant to be human.